Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show.
Lin Li did not say much to Archbishop Martin and the others. Instead, he brought them to the top floor of the central tower. The large control crystal on the control panel was emitting a bright light. Lin Li went straight to the control panel and communicated with the control crystal through mind control. According to the experience he had received long ago, he gave the Sky Castle the command to activate. With the command, the entire Sky Castle suddenly vibrated slightly, and the wall around that floor also became transparent. It looked as if it had completely disappeared, exposing the view outside. It made the people on that floor feel as if they were outside the tower. In fact, the continuously emerging nether storms could be seen clearly too. At the same time, they could also see that buildings and streets below the Sky Castle's tower were lighting up layer by layer, forming a huge and complex array. The 36 magic towers seemed to have also become shining lamp posts that were emitting dazzling rays of light, appearing as if small suns had gathered at the top of the tower. Okay, we're going back, Lin Li said to everyone. A bright ray of light suddenly erupted from the control crystal on the control panel. At the same time, the light on top of the 36 magic towers outside darted into the sky above the Sky Castle, forming a huge vortex of light in the void above it. When the vortex of light expanded to its maximum, the Sky Castle slowly rose under Lin Li's manipulation. First, the vortex reached the canopy in the outer layer, then the highest building, the central tower, and the 36 magic towers that entered the vortex of light. As the Sky Castle entered the light vortex gradually shrunk into a solar sphere, before gradually turning dimmer and disappearing in the void. Peace was finally restored. At the same time that the Sky Castle entered the light vortex, lightning suddenly appeared in the clear skies above the wilderness of the Leaden Kingdom in Anral. There seemed to be a large gash in the blue sky that appeared because of a sudden and massive wave of energy. Overwhelmed with fear, people below lost the power to run and had no choice but to look on in petrification, waiting for the arrival of disaster. Soon, a mountain peak that seemed to have been overturned slowly moved out of the gash together with a strong aura of destruction. Even though everything was happening in the sky high above, the strong sense of oppression made the people below feel like they were on the verge of a breakdown. Everyone was forced to lie on the ground as they constantly prayed to all the gods they knew in their hearts. Finally, the Sky Castle detached itself from the opening in the sky, after which the latter gradually closed up. Floating quietly in the sky, the massive Sky Castle cast a large shadow on the wilderness, but it did not fall straight down, unlike what everyone had been worried about. The herdsmen and people from a caravan, who were initially lying on the ground, dared not look up at all, but after waiting for a long time, they saw the giant shadow moving slowly on the ground. They then mustered the courage and looked up at the sky, only to see that the upside-down peak was floating slowly in a certain direction. Oh my god, what is that thing? What power can make a mountain peak fly into the sky? The people below were extremely curious about the floating upside-down mountain peak while feeling thankful for having escaped. Oh dear, that's the direction of the Holy Mountain. Could it be that the peak is going to the Holy Mountain? After all, the people in the caravan were more knowledgeable, and immediately saw that the direction that the mountain peak was drifting in was exactly the direction where the Holy Mountain of Light was located. Almost everyone in the Leaden Kingdom was a devotee of the Brilliant Shrine. Seeing that the mountain peak was floating towards the Holy Mountain, a terrifying idea popped up in their minds. However, although the mountain peak looked as if it was drifting slowly, it was in fact extremely fast, and it was too late for them to catch up with it. At this moment, Lin Li, who had successfully driven the Sky Castle to Anral, did not seem happy at all. Instead, he frowned and seemed extremely worried. Master Flick, we've already returned safely. What are you still worried about? Archbishop Martin noticed that Lin Li looked rather worried, and couldn't help but be confused. In his opinion, it was something worth rejoicing over. Even if Lin Li did not express uncontrollable joy, he should not seem so worried. Lin Li was snapped out of his thoughts, and he glanced at Archbishop Martin. Still looking as worried as ever, he said, "If I sensed it correctly, there seems to have been extraordinary changes in Anral since we left." After all, Lin Li was a sanctuary powerhouse, whose understanding of the world was far above that of those who were in the legendary realm. Hence, as soon as they returned from Anral, he immediately sensed the changes in the world. The structure of the world seemed to have become more unstable, while the density of the magical elements seemed to have increased hundreds of times. What? We seem to have only spent a month or so exploring the Sky Castle. How can there be so many changes? Although Donald already knew that Lin Li was a true sanctuary powerhouse, he still did not quite believe what Lin Li said. Lin Li did not answer, and instead gave another command to the control crystal. He then closed up the canopy outside the Sky Castle. As the canopy closed, the Sky Castle was almost completely exposed to the environment of Anral, and a massive amount of magical elements surged in, almost forming a magic tide. Although Donald was unable to sense the changes in the world laws, he was still very sensitive to the magical elements as a legendary mage, who was at the peak of the legendary realm. Hence, he immediately sensed that the magical elements in his surroundings had clearly grown tremendously compared to when he'd entered the Sky Castle. Since when have the magical elements in Anral become so intense? However, isn't that a good thing? Master Flick, what are you worried about? Although Donald could sense the changes in the magical elements, he could not understand what Lin Li was worried about. After all, the increase in the density of magical elements was indeed a good thing for mages. Legend had it that there had been 4 large-scale magic tides in the history of Anral. Whenever each magic tide appeared, it would allow a large number of mages who were stuck in a bottleneck to break through, allowing human magic civilization to develop by leaps and bounds. The benefits of breaking through bottlenecks were not just an increase in strength. For example, if a level 19 archmage could never enter the legendary realm, his lifespan might be about 100 years, but once he suddenly broke through a bottleneck and stepped into the legendary realm, he would immediately get another 100 years of life. Hence, to most mages, the appearance of a magic tide was definitely a wonderful opportunity that appeared once in a century. Only those who really stood at the top of Anral, such as the 3 arbitrators of the Supreme Council and Pope Rosario of the Brilliant Shrine, would know that the magic tides brought about more than just opportunities to mankind. Whenever a magic tide appeared, it would be accompanied by a great disaster, known as a black current. Even Pope Rosario of the Brilliant Shrine was injured by the primordial viper in one, which was evidence of how terrifying the black current was. That was also what Lin Li was worried about. Back in the Black Stone Mountains, Tutankhamun had once mentioned the black current and the magic tides. In fact, the black current was not a true disaster. The real disaster for the entire Anral was the magic tides, caused by the continuous expansion of the spatial rift. The expansion of the spatial rift would not only lead to the invasion of a large number of prehistoric magical beasts, it might also lead to the collapse of the structure of the world laws. By then, Anral might really crumble. The mission that Garesco had given Lin Li was to seal the spatial rifts caused by the collapse of the Tree of Eternity after he became strong enough. Hence, Lin Li had always been particularly concerned about the spatial rifts. Even though he did not like being a hero who saved the world, he could not sit still and watch Anral get destroyed for the sake of his own survival. Now, the changes that appeared in Anral immediately made Lin Li think of the issue of the spatial rifts. The sudden increase in intensity of the magical elements seemed to be similar to the description of the magic tides in the legends. Did that mean that the disaster that Garesco mentioned had arrived in advance? Lin Li controlled the Sky Castle and flew straight towards the holy mountain of the Brilliant Shrine, not specifically because he wanted to send Archbishop Martin and the others back, but more importantly because he wanted to learn more about everything that happened in Anral recently from Pope Rosario. After all, only someone like Pope Rosario would be able to know more profound things. Although the Sky Castle was massive, they could still fly through it quickly. It only took them less than half an hour of flying above the boundless wilderness of the northwestern border of the Leaden Kingdom to reach the vicinity of the Holy Mountain. The arrival of the Sky Castle naturally made the people of the Brilliant Shrine and the Leaden Kingdom nervous. No one would be able to stay calm in the face of such a massive object. Soon, the giant vulture knights of the Leaden Kingdom and the Pegasus Knights of the Brilliant Shrine took flight from their respective quarters and cautiously approached the Sky Castle. Master Flick, I'll just go out and explain to them, so don't be anxious yet. Please don't be impatient. Seeing this, Archbishop Martin immediately tensed up. However, it was because he was worried that Lin Li might annihilate the 2 major knight orders out of his impatience. After visiting the Sky Castle, he was very confident that the Sky Castle definitely possessed such power. Archbishop Martin, don't be nervous. Since I'm here as a guest, I don't want to be a malicious one. Please go and inform them, Lin Li said nonchalantly to the Archbishop. At the same time, he was also observing the 2 knight orders that were flying close to the Sky Castle. The giant vulture knights of the Leaden Kingdom rode giant vultures that had a wingspan of nearly 20 meters, and their large bodies could support a person riding on their backs. The knights were all wearing light armor, and they seemed extremely small on the backs of the vultures. They were each carrying a special crossbow, which was their main method of attack. Clearly, the giant vulture knights did not have strong combat power, and only answered for vanguard during battles. Usually, they were in charge of keeping order in the city. On the other hand, the Pegasus Knights of the Brilliant Shrine were riding Pegasuses with white wings that were similar to those of unicorns. In fact, they were mutant Pegasuses that had been passed down from the Dark Ages and had nothing to do with unicorns. They purely had feathered wings. Besides, most of their wings were black, or mixed in color. The brilliant shrine had merely chosen the white ones. The Pegasuses looked rather valiant, but in fact, they had almost no combat power. The knights on their backs were the ones who were mainly responsible for the battle. Hence, the Pegasus Knights of the Brilliant Shrine almost had no achievements that they were proud of. Their roles were similar to those of the Giant Vulture Knights of the Brilliant Shrine. After looking at the Giant Vulture Knights and the Pegasus Knights, Lin Li could also imagine why the Griffin Riders of the Felon Kingdom could have such a high reputation. The giant vultures and Pegasuses only gave the knights the ability to fly, while the griffins were real magical beasts that were physically strong, powerful, and had high talent in magic. The giant vulture knights and Pegasus Knights would probably be defeated terribly by the Griffin Riders of the Felon Kingdom. While Lin Li was observing the giant vulture knights and Pegasus Knights, Archbishop Martin had already arrived outside the Sky Castle and declared his identity as the Archbishop of the Brilliant Shrine. After a conversation, Archbishop Martin waved his hand domineeringly, and two groups of knights finally flew away from the Sky Castle. However, after Archbishop Martin came back, the crowd including Lin Li discovered that there was a drastic change in his expression. He no longer seemed as happy about returning as he used to be. Instead, he frowned. "Archbishop Martin, how are you? Could it be that something had happened?" Donald asked in puzzlement. "It's been 3 years. I didn't expect that after only a month or so of exploring in the Sky Castle. 3 years have already passed in Anral." Although Archbishop Martin was replying to Donald, his tone was filled with disbelief. Upon hearing Archbishop Martin's answer, Donald did not believe it at all. He exclaimed, "What? How can it be? Are you kidding?" That was indeed unbelievable. When they were exploring the Sky Castle, they did not lose track of time just because there was barely any difference between day and night there. Even if there was an error in the calculation of time, it would at most be a discrepancy of a few days. How could they have mixed up a period of a month or so with 3 years? Lin Li was also surprised by Archbishop Martin's words, but after carefully thinking about the process of exploring the Sky Castle, he immediately understood where the problem lay. In the process of exploring the Sky Castle, Lin Li and the others had entered the few domain worlds created by the Immortal King. The first was the world of Alana, from 1,300 years ago, followed by the Undead world, that had a revived Tree of Eternity, and lastly, the world that contained the Well of the Sun. It was normal for the flow of time of those domain worlds, and that of Anral to be different. For example, when they were in the Well of the Sun, the domain world that was used by the Immortal King's incarnation showed countless evolutions in a moment, and the speed of the flow of time was maximized. However, those who were in that world would not feel an obvious difference in the passage of time. Hence, to Lin Li, there was nothing surprising about the fact that 3 years had passed, and what really made him worried was the timing of the calamity that Garesco had calculated, which Tutankhamun predicted. At that time, he said that it would happen in 2 to 3 years. In fact, when Lin Li entered the Sky Castle, there was already not much time left until the calamity that Garesco had predicted. Now that 3 years had passed, did that mean that the calamity had descended? At this moment, Lin Li thought about the changes he felt when he returned to Anral. The sudden increase in the density of the magical elements, and the decrease in stability of the structure of the world laws seemed to have indicated that the calamity had struck Anral. The calamity had already begun, but Lin Li did not think that he was already prepared for it. Although he was already a true sanctuary powerhouse, that was precisely the reason he was clear about how difficult it would be to seal the spacetime rifts. Even though he had already reached the peak of level 26, and was in essence only one step away from level 27, he still did not have the confidence to complete this mission that Garesco had left behind. The only thing for him to be thankful for was the fact that although this calamity that Garesco had predicted had already begun, it had yet to go into full swing and escalate to the point where it was unmanageable. In other words, Lin Li still had some time, and he did not have to seal the spacetime rifts immediately. Master Falik, what do you think about this matter? Although Archbishop Martin was the first to get that news, he was still in disbelief about the fact that 3 years had passed even though they had only spent a month in the Sky Castle. Seeing that Lin Li had slipped deep in thought after hearing that news, he quickly asked Lin Li for his opinion. Since that was already the truth, there was no point in worrying anymore. Putting aside his worries for the time being, Lin Li said to Archbishop Martin, "This actually isn't strange at all. Do you remember the strange worlds we entered when we were in the Sky Castle? That should be the cause of this problem now. Well, it's better not to talk about this issue now. There must have been plenty of changes in Anral in the past 3 years. I'd like to meet with Pope Rosario and find out some things." Archbishop Martin was initially already thinking about how he could invite Lin Li to the Brilliant Shrine. Hence, after hearing Lin Li's request to see Archbishop Martin, he agreed happily. Controlling the Sky Castle, Lin Li first headed to the capital of the Leaden Kingdom, and landed the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom on the ground. The latter would have to figure out how to get back to the Rotterdam Kingdom on their own. Lin Li was not a cab driver, and was not obliged to send them all the way to their doorstep. Then, Lin Li changed the direction that he was moving in, and brought Archbishop Martin and the others to the vicinity of the Holy Mountain. He appeared out of courtesy, but he did not let the Sky Castle move all the way above the Holy Mountain. After handing the Sky Castle over to his subordinates temporarily, Lin Li followed Archbishop Martin to the Holy Mountain. Due to the fact that Archbishop Martin had been missing for 3 years, the people of the Brilliant Shrine thought that Archbishop Martin had died in the Sky Castle. At this moment, they were all exceptionally shocked to see the sudden appearance of Archbishop Martin. In particular, the archbishops like Inglos and others who were his old friends all flocked to the foot of the Holy Mountain to welcome him. "Masterfully, why are you with Martin?" When Inglos and the others saw Lin Li and Archbishop Martin walking over together, everyone felt a little strange. After all, after Archbishop Martin had entered the Sky Castle, he lost all contact with the Brilliant Shrine. Hence, they did not know that the three forces had united to explore the Sky Castle. This time, we managed to explore the Sky Castle smoothly, all thanks to Masterfully. Otherwise, I'm afraid you guys would really never see me again, Archbishop Martin said emotionally when he saw his old friends, and thought about the near-death experiences that he had in the Sky Castle. "Did you guys meet in the Sky Castle? Hurry and tell me what's going on. Why did you spend 3 years exploring the Sky Castle?" The few of them were immediately curious after hearing the Archbishop's words. Thus, they quickly began asking about their exploration of the Sky Castle. However, Lin Li was extremely eager to find out about what happened in Anral, and did not have the time to discuss that matter with them. Hence, he said, "Dear all, I hope to see His Holiness the Pope as soon as possible. Please help me call the Pope. Let Archbishop Martin tell you guys what happened in the Sky Castle." Seeing that Lin Li seemed to be in a real hurry, Inglos and the others did not delay any further. They immediately sent someone to go to the Church of Dawn, at the top of the Holy Mountain, to call Pope Rosario. At the same time, the rest of them walked towards the mountain while asking Archbishop Martin about the various experiences he had during the exploration of the Sky Castle. Although Lin Li had used the people of the Brilliant Shrine as cannon fodder during the exploration of the Sky Castle, Archbishop Martin was extremely grateful to Lin Li for his help. Hence, when Archbishop Martin was recounting his experiences and sharing it with Inglos and the others, Archbishop Martin did not hide his gratitude towards Lin Li, and simply praised him endlessly, treating him like a selfless role model. Even Lin Li felt a little embarrassed when he was listening to it by the side. As Archbishop Inglos and the others heard Archbishop Martin praising Lin Li for saving him and his subordinates, they thanked Lin Li enthusiastically several times throughout the journey. No matter how thick-skinned Lin Li was, he couldn't help but feel embarrassed. After the person who had gone to invite Pope Rosario returned, Lin Li was finally freed from his misery. He quickly followed that person to see Pope Rosario. Lin Li chatted with Pope Rosario in the Dawn Cathedral for a long time before Pope Rosario personally walked him out of the door. Fortunately, the senior executives of the Brilliant Shrine like Inglos and the others all knew that Lin Li was also the son of the Holy Light, who had helped Rosario get rid of the viper's poison in his body. Hence, they did not seem too shocked. Others would probably have been flabbergasted to the point of losing their minds. During Lin Li's conversation with Pope Rosario, which lasted half a day, Inglos and the others also found out from Archbishop Martin about the entire process of the exploration of the Sky Castle, as well as the fact that Lin Li had obtained the Sky Castle. Although Inglos and the others were shocked that Lin Li had obtained the Sky Castle, Lin Li's battle with High Lord Osric, and the strength he displayed was what they truly marveled at. Of course, Archbishop Martin did not forget to mention that Lin Li owned the powerful magical weapon that contained a pure power of holy light, and had the magical ability of increasing the abilities of the devotees through the baptism of holy light. When Inglos and the others heard that, they immediately had the same idea as Archbishop Martin, and that was to make Lin Li visit the Brilliant Shrine frequently to increase their power through the help of that magical weapon. There was no need to think about snatching it from him at all. It was not that Inglos and the others were righteous. If someone else had such a special magical weapon, they would not have to consider anything at all. They could either rope him in and get him to join the Brilliant Shrine, or rule him a heretic and exterminate him, which was something that the Brilliant Shrine had done plenty of since its establishment. However, Lin Li was different. Not only was he the son of the Holy Light, he was also a true sanctuary powerhouse. Apart from Pope Rosario, no one in the Brilliant Shrine would be able to compare to him in terms of strength. Besides, Pope Rosario definitely wouldn't form a feud with a sanctuary powerhouse over a magical weapon as such. Hence, when Lin Li walked out of the Dawn Cathedral, Inglos and the rest hurriedly approached him and politely requested to see the magical weapon that contained the power of holy light. Lin Li did not mind giving the Brilliant Shrine some benefits. After all, the Brilliant Shrine had been cooperating well with the Tower of Dusk. The senior executives of the Brilliant Shrine, Inglos, and the others had always had friendly relations with him too. However, he could not be bothered to do that now. Although he had learned about the changes that took place in Anril in the past 3 years, and knew that the calamity had not escalated to an unmanageable degree, he had been away from the Tower of Dusk for 3 years. Hence, he was eager to go back to see the development of the Tower of Dusk in the past 3 years. In particular, Rosario mentioned that the mages in Anril had been improving to various degrees due to the magic tides. A large number of mages who had been stuck in a bottleneck and might never have been able to advance another step further had broken through their bottleneck under the influence of the magic tides. At the same time, the magical beasts of Anril had also advanced greatly in level after being affected by the magic tides. To others, it might seem like a good thing, but for people like Lin Li and Pope Rosario, it could not be regarded as the progress of human magic civilization. Instead, it acted as a hindrance in the development of magic civilization. Although it was a good thing to break through the bottleneck might only be a temporary hurdle. For some who were gifted in magic, with some training and enlightenment, they would be able to break through the bottleneck successfully as well. However, the appearance of the magic tides seemed to have caused the mages to lose the experience of breaking through the bottleneck. If they were to encounter another one, it would be difficult for them to break through once more with their own power. For example, a person who suddenly received a large amount of money would more likely than not fail to plan their finances well and end up squandering away the money. On the other hand, those who earned their money through hard work would know that each cent did not come easy, and they would know how to manage their money better. Hence, one could imagine that a large number of mages with magical talent would be ruined by the magic tides. Hence, the human magical civilization, at least in their generation, would almost be tantamount to becoming stagnant. Lin Li had yet to reach the level of being responsible for the prosperity of the world. Hence, he did not care about the well-being of other mages, but he had to consider the mages of the Tower of Dusk, especially the elite ones who had potential. Lin Li did not want the magic tides to destroy the future of the Tower of Dusk. Hence, Lin Li was now eager to rush back to clean the mess created by the magic tides. He was not in the mood to waste time in the Brilliant Shrine at all. Of course, Inglos and the others understood how Lin Li felt. Hence, they did not insist on making Lin Li stay. After Lin Li agreed to visit the Brilliant Shrine often in the future, they saw Lin Li off to the foot of the holy mountain together. The fact that almost all the senior executives of the Brilliant Shrine were sending a young mage away had caused a huge uproar in the city. After bidding farewell to Inglos and the others, Lin Li used the power of flight to fly back to the Sky Castle. The massive Sky Castle, that was like a gloomy cloud, slowly moved in the direction of the breezy plains. In the process of the flight on the Sky Castle, Lin Li had also begun arranging the mages under him to familiarize themselves with the operations of a portion of the Sky Castle. After all, the power of the Sky Castle could not be exerted by a single person. Besides, after Lin Li gained control of the Sky Castle, there was still a lot of work for him to do. For example, back when he followed arbitrator Chris to the Sky Garden, Chris used a teleportation technique that did not require a teleportation portal at all to bring them to the Sky Garden at any time. However, it required some detailed settings. Lin Li did not want to have to rely on flying whenever he boarded the Sky Castle. He felt that it would be much easier to open up a teleportation portal. Hence, the first thing that Lin Li wanted to do was to reset the teleportation function. Fortunately, Lin Li had obtained a large amount of information about the Sky Castle from the control crystal. Hence, it wasn't that difficult for him to set it up. It only required him to set a teleportation icon and activate the teleportation function of the teleportation portal in the Sky Castle. As he flew towards the breezy plains in the Sky Castle, he saw that Dulan City and the area where the Tower of Dusk was located were currently shrouded in the thick fog from a battle. When Lin Li left 3 years ago, there was already a Magic City prototype in the surroundings of the Tower of Dusk. The scale of the Magic City had already expanded greatly after 3 years of development. However, it did not give off the vibe of a newly built city, especially the buildings in the periphery of the city that was covered in traces of war. Outside the Magic City, there was a team composed of thousands of mages and mercenaries, which was launching a fierce attack on the Magic City. Dozens of massive weapons were roaring loudly. Large burning stone balls and gigantic arrows that were as thick as a human waist were constantly bombarding the city walls around the Magic City, causing ripples to form on the magic shield that covered the walls. The one who was commanding the team to attack the Tower of Dusk was none other than Canyuman, the president of the Guild of Magic of Garesco City. The people around Canyuman were just as strong as him, and the way they dressed showed that they were obviously not from the Guild of Magic. There were even some who were not humans. There was a ruthless-looking dwarf with only one eye, an elf with a face that was covered in sanguine lines, a necromancer who was covering his face with a hood, and a person with a seductive-looking upper body and a serpent's lower body. Besides, there were also a few human powerhouses, sword sages, assassins, and of course mages. However, all of them seemed sinister. "Candyman, didn't you say that they were extremely weak? Why haven't we entered the city after more than 10 days?" asked the elf, who had sanguine wreaths on his face, and was emitting a bloody aura instead of the natural aura of an elf. It was as if he had just come out of a pool of blood. That elf was one of the fallen ones who had turned into blood elves, betrayed the goddess of nature, and surrendered to evil. They turned their backs on their faith in the goddess of nature, and made a deal with demons to exchange for greater power. For the sake of obtaining the power from demons, they indulged in endless killing to acquire more souls. Candyman took a look at that elf, but he did not get angered by his derisive comment, because he knew what to expect from those damned fallen elves. At the same time, they also had strength to match it. Although Candyman had successfully reached the peak of the legendary realm, he still did not have the confidence to have an advantage against the blood elf. "Vesha, this battle is too boring. Why don't we return to the tent and do something more interesting?" The one-eyed dwarf playfully flirted with the serpentine woman next to him as if there was no one around while supporting his weight with his giant axe on the ground. Faced with the teasing and flirting of the one-eyed dwarf, the serpentine woman Vesha did not seem weak. She smiled and said, "Sure, I hope your bones are stronger than I thought." While saying that, she swung the long snake tail behind her twice. "These mercenaries are really sly. All they do is take money without doing what they're supposed to. Seems like we really have to give them a little push." The necromancer, whose face was covered in a large hood, spoke in a hoarse and sinister voice. Before the ones around him even said anything, he raised the skeleton staff in his hand. Black fog appeared on the battlefield immediately like tidal waves, and surged towards the mercenary corps that were currently attacking the city. All the mercenaries that came in contact with the black shrieked immediately as if they were put through massive agony. After the screaming vanished, the mercenaries that were eroded by the black fog had become completely different. The skin and flesh on their bodies had fallen off, and they had become skeletal warriors. However, the skeletal warriors that were transformed from humans were emitting silver rays of light, because all the power of their bodies was gathered in their bones. They were clearly much stronger than ordinary skeletal warriors. Besides, unlike ordinary skeletal warriors that only knew to fight with their own power, they had inherited a large portion of combat experience before their deaths. Hence, not only did their power not weaken, it even increased greatly. "Damn it, Sandoz, are you trying to turn us into the public enemies of the entire Anral?" Candyman wanted to get them to stop, but it was already too late. He had no choice but to yell at the necromancer angrily. "Candyman, your mission is to attack the Tower of Dusk. Once we get the Tree of Eternity, you don't need to worry about the rest. Besides, I'd like to remind you that we can't stall for time and hold the Ashen Warlock back for too long. If he manages to rush over in time, we will be punished." The necromancer Sandoz warned Candyman in a gloomy tone. Upon hearing Sandoz's warning, Candyman immediately stopped being angry. He had no choice but to turn around and give an order to his team to attack in full swing. Actually, his orders were redundant. The mercenaries had already turned into skeletal warriors, who were not afraid of pain and death. Hence, they were no longer sneaky, and instead focused all their attention on the battle. Although Candyman's mages were shocked by the change of those mercenaries, they did not get into a commotion because of that. They continued to execute Candyman's orders, and led a large number of magic spells to bombard the gate of the magic city. Although Sandoz's words had clearly given the blood elf a reminder, the others dared not stand by the side idly and watch the battle. Instead, they took out their weapons and joined the siege. The one-eyed dwarf wielded a wheeled axe, the blood elf picked up his sanguine long bow, and Sandoz summoned the tide of death, causing the endless army of undead creatures to join the battle. Although the Tower of Dusk had a strong defense, their strength lay in the tower itself and the eternal furnace. The area outside the magic city, especially the part that was built after Lin Li's departure, had a relatively weaker defense because Lin Li did not arrange any mageths or alchemy arrays there. Besides, other than the mages and the fearless undead creatures, there were also numerous powerhouses that were at the peak of the legendary realm on the enemy's side. That power had far exceeded the current capacity of the Tower of Dusk. Finally, the gate of the magic city crumbled with a loud roar, and the army of undead creatures seemed as if they were swarming out from open floodgates into the city. Fortunately, those from the Tower of Dusk were already prepared to retreat, and thus there were not many casualties amidst the chaos. "Damn it, There's a line of defense. Canuman and the rest cursed unanimously after seeing the scene behind the gate. The second line of defense of the Tower of Dusk was built based on the buildings from 3 years ago, and this line of defense was far more powerful than the previous one due to all of Lin Li's elaborate designs. However, even though they had retreated to a more solid line of defense, Gavin and the other senior executives, who were in charge of commanding the members of the Tower of Dusk, did not seem relaxed at all. When Lin Li explored the Tower of Dusk, he brought away a large number of elites of the Tower of Dusk, and left none of the legendary level combat forces behind. About 7 of the enemies he was facing now were powerhouses who were at the peak of the legendary realm and had extraordinary power. Even with a stronger line of defense, he might not be able to last for long. Gavin, I think we should retreat to the Eternal Furnace. Only with the power of the Eternal Furnace can we resist these enemies. The senior executives of the Tower of Dusk who were standing in front of the tower said anxiously to Gavin while watching the undead creatures swarm into the city. Indeed, although a few mages of the Tower of Dusk had also become legendary mages because of the influence of the magic tides, they had just stepped into the legendary realm and could not compare to the powerhouses who were at the pinnacle of this realm. Only the Eternal Furnace at the top of the tower could allow the mages of the Tower of Dusk to temporarily get more power to contend with the invading enemies. Of course, Gavin knew about that too. However, retreating to the Eternal Furnace meant giving up everything including the newly established Magic City, and perhaps even the Tower of Dusk. Even if they could really make the enemies retreat with the power of the Eternal Furnace, it would not be easy for the Tower of Dusk to return to its original state. It was almost like reversing everything and starting all over again. If Lin Li was still in the Tower of Dusk, it would be extremely fast for the Tower of Dusk to recover even if everything was reversed. However, the problem was that Lin Li had left the Tower of Dusk for 3 years, and even though Gavin believed that he would return safely, he did not know when exactly he would return. Gavin did not want Lin Li to come back and realized that the Tower of Dusk had already fallen and vanished. That was precisely the reason that Gavin implemented a defense plan as such, to preserve the property of the Tower of Dusk as much as possible so that it would not fall apart after this battle due to excessive losses. Get ready to activate the all-kill array and charge the magical crystal cannons. Gavin helplessly gave a new order to the subordinates around him as he looked at the army of undead creatures that was attacking the second line of defense. When Lin Li left the Tower of Dusk, he actually left behind a sufficient number of magical crystals for them. However, there would still be a day that they ran out of magical crystals. Gavin had no idea when Lin Li would return either. Hence, he dared not launch full-blown attacks at once for fear that they might use up all of the magical crystals and have none left for the crucial juncture. However, Gavin now had no choice but to make up his mind. If he was not determined, he might not have another chance in the future. If the enemies were to attack, all their magical crystals would end up with others no matter how many they had. With Gavin's order, the entire Tower of Dusk was immediately shrouded by faint light, and a terrifying atmosphere that was full of evilness and a murderous and destructive aura was spreading out in all directions with the Tower of Dusk as its center. The windows at the top floor of the Tower of Dusk were opened, and the barrels of the magical crystal cannons were stuck out of the windows. The muzzles were also shining with the light of condensing mana. Seeing the changes in the Tower of Dusk, Canuman frantically reminded the crowd, "Be careful. The Tower of Dusk has a Mageth array called the All-Kill Array, which is said to be a Guru-level Mageth array. Its power is incredible. Besides, there are more than 20 magical crystal cannons at the top of the tower." All-Kill Array. What a bold claim. "Let me see how the All-Kill Array works," the necromancer Sandoz exclaimed, clearly dismissive of Canuman's reminder. He swung his skeleton staff forward and immediately opened 4 more vortex-shaped doors in front of the crowd. He actually cast 5 tides of death at the same time. When the tide of death was in operation, it would consume the caster's mana. Hence, even if there were necromancers who could cast 50 tides of death at once, they would not have enough mana to keep them running. It would be better to focus on sustaining 1 tide of death. However, the necromancer Sandoz clearly did not care about the tide of death's consumption of his mana. Although he had not stepped into the sanctuary realm, he had a massive amount of mana that was not something that ordinary legendary mages could compare to. The 5 tides of death and 5 armies of undead creatures almost filled the space outside the line of defense of the Tower of Dusk. The fearless skeletal warriors were at the front, while the Hellghouls were continuously launching hellfire bombs that rained down on the Tower of Dusk's line of defense. Groups of vampires were hovering in the sky, looking for a chance to attack. Next, more than 10 humorous worms spat out erosive dragon breath. Surrounded by an army of undead creatures, the Tower of Dusk became a reef in the vast ocean, which seemed like it would be submerged in the water anytime soon. However, the Tower of Dusk did not submit. The all-kill array was finally activated completely, and the terrifying power immediately engulfed the Tower of Dusk. The undead creatures that rushed into the all-kill array were immediately crushed into ashes, as if they had fallen into a stone mill. At this moment, the 20-odd magical crystal cannons were emitting incomparably solid mana attacks, which formed dazzling pillars of light that were bombarding the enemies. Every mana cannon shot that landed would result in a long empty area among the army of undead creatures. There were also some mana cannons that were shot at the humorous wyrms in the sky. Clearly, the humorous wyrms were not actual humorous wyrms. Under the powerful mana cannon's barrage, there were some that immediately disintegrated because of the bombardment. Atrocious. What are you guys waiting for? Sandoz seemed rather annoyed when he saw his army of undead creatures being overwhelmed by the sharp counterattacks of the Tower of Dusk. Okay, aren't they just some bones? You can get as many of them as you want, the Blood Elf said nonchalantly before chanting an incantation. A huge six-pointed star array emerged in the open space in front of the Blood Elf, after which a demon engulfed in black gas and with 2 wings on its back crawled out of the six-pointed star array. Destroy them. These are the souls that you want. The Blood Elf tossed a bead that was filled with an unknown number of souls. He then pointed at the Tower of Dusk. However, when the soul bead that the demon wanted to devour rushed towards the Tower of Dusk, the six-pointed star array on the ground did not disappear. Instead, another demon crawled out of it. 10 legendary-level demons that were wielding pitch-black tridents were dashing towards the Tower of Dusk's line of defense with heavy footsteps. The demons that had legendary-level power were the greater demons that liked trading souls with humans the most. The Blood Elf summoned 10 of them at once, and he had probably used more than 10,000 souls. After praying, the one-eyed dwarf raised the wheel axe in his hand, and a thunderbolt suddenly fell from the clear sky, striking the spike at the top of the axe. However, the one-eyed dwarf did not get scorched by it, and instead his body seemed to expand as if it had been filled with gas. In the blink of an eye, he turned into a 3-meter-tall giant. Legend had it that dwarves possessed the genes of the Titans, but that seemed like a joke to most people. The Alpine giants being the descendants of the Titans seemed like a more reliable claim. However, there was indeed such a legend among the dwarves. It was said that as long as a dwarf could truly awaken his own bloodline, he could transform into a powerful titan. It was said that the dwarves had a powerful team that could awaken their bloodlines among the rebellion forces that tried to overthrow the High Elves at the end of the Dark Age. The team, which had less than 100 people, was named after the sacred relic of the dwarves, the Thunder God's hammer. It also acted like a heavy hammer during the War of Rebellion by resisting and thwarting the High Elves' suppression several times. Saladin, the first king of the Dwarf Kingdom, who was also the most famous hero among the dwarves, was the one who had led the team. According to history, when using the power awakened by his bloodline, the dwarf king Saladin could transform into a giant that was 10 meters in height and had the power to rip dragons apart with his bare hands. In the war with the High Elves, the dwarf king Saladin had fought with the strongest powerhouses of the High Elves several times, and his hammer was stained with the blood of numerous High Elves. Of course, the one-eyed dwarf's power after the awakening was still incomparable to that of the dwarf king Saladin. However, even in the form of a 3-meter-tall man, the power that he had was extremely shocking. The giant axe in the hand of the one-eyed dwarf initially looked extremely out of place due to the juxtaposition to his figure. However, after his body expanded vertically, the axe seemed much more suitable for him. After awakening his bloodline, the one-eyed dwarf let out a roar from the sky, and the giant axe in his hand smashed into the ground with a loud boom, causing the ground to quake violently. At the same time, from the spot that the axe bombarded, a massive rift that could swallow a person whole began expanding quickly towards the Tower of Dusk's second line of defense, causing cracks to appear in the brick wall that was enhanced with magic. However, the attack that the one-eyed dwarf launched to vent his anger did not only affect the Tower of Dusk. During the process of the crack spreading in the ground, it also devoured a large number of undead creatures, and it was as if it had opened up a blank corridor among the tide of undead creatures. Damn, one-eyed dwarf, whose side are you on? Necromancer Sandoz did not find the loss of the undead creatures a pity, but when he saw that the one-eyed dwarf's attack had caused greater damage to him than to the Tower of Dusk, he immediately flew into rage. Haha, I'm really sorry for accidentally damaging your bones, the one-eyed dwarf said while laughing loudly and raising the giant axe in his hand again. Even the numerous rays of lighting could be seen flickering on the giant axe. The one-eyed dwarf, who was no longer a dwarf, rushed into the army of undead creatures and managed to cross the distance of several hundred meters in a few steps, knocking over and crushing many undead creatures along the way. When he reached the second line of defense of the Tower of Dusk, he once again swung his axe, whose power had already accumulated. With a loud bang, the ground began quaking violently again. Blast him back. Gavin, who was acting as the commander of the Tower of Dusk's team, immediately got a great shock when he saw the ferocious behavior of the one-eyed dwarf. He frantically ordered his subordinates to focus all their power and attention on launching a counterattack. Based on the power of the one-eyed dwarf's attack and the vibration of the ground, Gavin could completely feel how tyrannical he was. He was even more overbearing than other weapons, and he might really cause their line of defense to be broken in just a few blows. After receiving Gavin's orders, 4 magical crystal cannons turned their muzzles, and 4 solid mana cannon shots were immediately blasted at the one-eyed dwarf in front of the defense line. Even if the one-eyed dwarf had strength that was at the peak of the legendary level, he would be in a pickle after being blasted by 4 mana cannons. However, to everyone's surprise, the one-eyed dwarf did not dodge in the face of the mana cannon's attack at all. In fact, he even had the time to grin widely. Immediately afterwards, the 4 mana cannon shots darted out in random order, instantly engulfing the 3-meter-tall body of the dwarf. Is that one-eyed dwarf a fool? He didn't even flinch or dodge in the face of the mana cannons. Seeing this scene, the mages from the Tower of Dusk were a little stunned. Although they were glad to get rid of a powerful enemy with ease, they instinctively found the current situation a little strange. Well, Master Sandoz, how did Master Danton just? Clearly, Candyman was not very familiar with Sandoz and the others. Hence, he couldn't help but be shocked when he saw that the one-eyed dwarf did not dodge the 4 mana cannons. Only legendary mages could use defensive spells against the attacks of magical crystal cannons. However, it would definitely not be easy. Even if the one-eyed dwarf evolved again, his magical defense abilities would never reach such a high level. Why did he try to resist it head-on like a fool? PSHT, how can dwarves create the magical crystal cannons without leaving a way out for themselves? The blood elf said sneeringly and dismissively. Even if they had left a way out, they couldn't have possibly tried to resist the attacks using their bodies. Candyman thought to himself. However, he did not get angered because of the attitude of the blood elf, because he knew that there were many powerhouses hidden everywhere in unknown places of the continent, even though the peculiar ones they saw now did not seem too competent. Candyman initially planned to use the few powerhouses as his weapons, but he never thought that they would turn against him, become the leaders, and then set him up. However, that was good since the 3 arbitrators of the Supreme Council did not take him seriously anyway. Besides, these powerhouses were connected to figures who were rumored to be just as strong as the 3 arbitrators. However, at this moment, the light that engulfed the one-eyed dwarf had also dissipated, and Candyman knew what the blood elf was referring to when he said that he had left a backup solution for himself to deal with the magical crystal cannons. To his astonishment, he discovered that the one-eyed dwarf's body was not only not covered in any wounds after resisting the 4 mana cannons, but his muscles had also expanded. Clearly, he now had more explosive power. He actually absorbed the power of the mana cannons. Candyman couldn't help but be shocked. Although the mana cannons were condensed with pure mana at high intensity, no mage could retrieve a tinge of mana from within. However, dwarves could use their strong bodies to absorb the power and turn it into their own. That was truly unbelievable. Fortunately, in the human kingdoms, magical crystal cannons were powerful defensive weapons, but they did not truly replace other defensive equipment such as crossbows that protected the city. Otherwise, once the dwarf kingdom waged a war with the human kingdoms, the magical crystals at the top of the city walls would become energizers for dwarves. Candyman also knew that even the dwarves could not make every single warrior of theirs possess the same power. The problem probably lay with the so-called bloodline awakening of the dwarves. However, after feeling shocked, he stopped dwelling on that matter. After all, no matter what the human kingdoms were like, it would have nothing to do with him, the president of a guild of magic. At the same time, the people on the side of the Tower of Dusk were already gasping uncontrollably in astonishment. Even the Wyrms that were famous for their defensive abilities started stumbling after being struck by the magical crystal cannons. How could the dwarf have been perfectly fine as if nothing had happened? He took on the blow of the magical crystal cannons with his body that was made of flesh, and yet he wasn't injured at all. Instead, he seemed to have become even more menacing, as if he had taken some tonic that was far beyond their knowledge. Continued to attack the enemies with the magical crystal cannons. Mages, enter the eternal furnace and attack that dwarf with magic. Gavin clenched his fists tightly while giving his subordinates orders composedly. Why isn't the president here yet? 3 years ago, Lin Li stepped into the sanctuary realm, and the Tower of Dusk was in the limelight in the breezy plains, and possibly even the entire Felon Kingdom. The Tower of Dusk almost became the holy ground of magic of the breezy plains, and there would be mages coming from faraway places in hopes of joining the Tower of Dusk. Even if they were incompetent, they would still hope to register and become a member so that they could enter the Tower of Dusk's public library to learn. However, as Lin Li proceeded to the Sky Castle, time passed, and rumors spread in the breezy plains that Lin Li had died in the Sky Castle. There was a sudden twist in the situation of the Tower of Dusk, and it changed for the worse. Gradually, some major forces began to lose faith in the Tower of Dusk, while some small and medium-sized forces also began to submit to other forces. The number of mages began to decrease continuously and rapidly as well. Gavin had tried hard to change this situation before, but to ordinary people, 3 years was simply too long of a duration. In Anril, the majority of things were based on strength, and unlike those ancient powers with a rich heritage, the Tower of Dusk could be considered to be struggling after the departure of Lin Li, their sanctuary powerhouse. Fortunately, Lin Li had once revealed some ruthless means that served as a deterrence to many. Otherwise, the Tower of Dusk would have been doomed by now. After all, rumors were still just rumors, and there was no confirmed news of Lin Li's death. Many were still worried that Lin Li, the young sanctuary powerhouse, might return to settle scores with them. However, even then, it would be impossible for the Tower of Dusk to maintain their original position as there were many who were plotting against them, both openly and in secret. Otherwise, Kanyaman and the others wouldn't have managed to fight their way to Duland, as they would have been chased out of the breezy plains as soon as they entered. In the current situation, the Tower of Dusk was relying on the tower and the eternal furnace to barely prevent annihilation. However, they had no time to care about the other businesses that they ran outside the tower. Actually, many members of the Tower of Dusk had the intentions to surrender and leave. Even if the enemies were only in the periphery, they would be trapped inside over time. When Lin Li explored the Sky Castle, he brought away his undead servants, the powerhouses under him, and many of the mages of the Tower of Dusk. As for the Tower of Dusk, they did not have a single experienced legendary powerhouse at all. Instead, they still had to rely on the magic tides that suddenly appeared to allow a few archmages to advance to the legendary realm. However, beginners of the legendary realm could not exert much of the power of the legendary realm. Although they could trump some of those who were below the legendary level, they were far from being competent enough to fight the current enemies. In the face of the enemy's frenzied attacks now, the Tower of Dusk might not have reached the point of being in critical danger yet, but there was almost no hope for anyone. Even if the enemies retreated, no one knew if it wouldn't be for the sake of luring out the people inside. During this period of time, such matters had happened several times. In other words, regardless of whether the enemies retreated or not, the Tower of Dusk could only stay on the spot. Under Gavin's orders, a portion of mages, who were mostly level 19 archmages, entered the Eternal Furnace from the top of the high tower. Meanwhile, the person in charge of the core of the Eternal Furnace was Jarian, who had abandoned his guild of magic and followed Lin Li to live a carefree life for several years. Jarian was rather lucky. Initially, his limited talent in magic caused him to stagnate at level 19, regardless of how hard he worked. Besides, he was too lazy to put in effort as well. However, the magic tides appeared at just the right time, thus allowing Jarian to suddenly break through the legendary realm and become a legendary mage that he never imagined himself to become. Although Jarian could not even create his own magical domain with his current abilities, he was rather satisfied with the status quo because he could at least live a carefree life for hundreds of years. Other than the subordinates who had signed a contract with him, Jarian was the single person in the Tower of Dusk whom Lin Li trusted the most. Hence, before he left for the Sky Castle, Lin Li had already entrusted Jarian with the matters regarding the Eternal Furnace. At this moment, Jarian was watching the battle anxiously while staying in the Eternal Furnace. If not for Gavin's previous persuasion, he would have dashed down with the staff. The mages who had been waiting for the Mage Legion for a long time had all followed the orders and arrived at the Eternal Furnace to report to Jarian with Gavin's orders. Having held his breath for a long time, Jarian immediately dashed towards the core of the Eternal Furnace without wasting any more time. Damn it, that kid Fulik has only gone out for a few years, but Tom, Dick, and Harry have already barged in. Kids, don't waste your mana anymore. I'm going to kill that bunch of bastards. Jarian hollered while activating the Eternal Furnace, according to Lin Li's previous instructions. At the top of the Tower of Dusk, the Eternal Furnace, which was only faintly radiating some red light so far, suddenly emitted boundless flames like a sun above the tower. At the same time, the Ice and Fire natural domain, which Lin Li had fused with the Eternal Furnace, also engulfed the entire Eternal Furnace immediately, causing the archmages who had been authorized to temporarily break through to the legendary realm immediately. More than 100 archmages instantly became legendary mages. Due to the influence of the magic tides, many of the mages had broken through their bottlenecks, and their power was truly terrifying. However, The pseudo-legendary mages would return to their initial levels once they left the ice and fire natural domain of the eternal furnace. Otherwise, why would the enemies have shown up at their door? Candyman and the others who were opposite knew that the flame palace at the top of the Tower of Dusk was the legendary eternal furnace that High Lord Osric had built. However, they were clueless about the power of the eternal furnace. After all, back when Osric was building the eternal furnace, he encountered an accident and suddenly began researching the perfect body halfway through the construction. He then created the mausoleum for himself. The real eternal furnace had never appeared in history before, let alone show its prowess during the battle. When a large number of legendary level magic spells suddenly dropped from the eternal furnace, Candyman and the others finally got a great shock. They could tell from the density of the legendary level magic spells that they were definitely cast by more than 100 legendary mages. To them, it was definitely not good news. Even though quite a few of them were legendary powerhouses, who were at the peak of this realm, it was impossible to ignore this numerical advantage of the Tower of Dusk, because none of them had entered the sanctuary realm. Seeing the legendary level magic spells falling down like the rain, Candyman and the others couldn't help but feel their scalps turn numb. They had been dealing with the Tower of Dusk for a long time, and thought that they had already gained a thorough understanding of the Tower of Dusk's abilities. To their surprise, the Tower of Dusk had such a terrifying hidden power. Damn, didn't you say that all their elite mages have been brought away? What's going on? The one-eyed dwarf Danton was the first to be owned as he had rushed to the front of the line of defense. Even though his strong body could withstand the attacks of 4 monocannons and legendary level magic spells were fundamentally different. Danton gave up on continuing to attack the defenses of the Tower of Dusk, and instead waved the giant axe above his head in time to shield himself from the countless magic spells. However, although he had blocked the attacks, his 3-meter body was still blasted away by the magic spells. Along their trajectory, they crushed several skeletal warriors before finally stopping at a spot near Candyman and the others. There must be something strange about the Eternal Furnace. Even if all their elite mages stayed behind, there can't be so many legendary mages. Candyman hollered, seemingly explaining, but also venting his anger. He no longer had the composure of a president of a guild. Candyman's Garesco City Guild of Magic was definitely worthy of being called the second largest guild, after the Alana Guild of Magic. There were even some who called Garesco City and Alana City the 2 greatest magic capitals of Anral. It was not simply because it was the birthplace of the god of mages, Garesco, but more importantly because it was definitely competent enough to be worthy of it. However, even the Garesco Guild of Magic would not be able to produce hundreds of legendary mages. Even after experiencing the magic tides, Candyman still had less than 20 legendary mages under him. In fact, even if all the guilds of magic, excluding the Tower of Dusk, joined forces, they might not be able to produce 100 legendary mages. Candyman always believed that Lin Li wasn't that competent, and had merely gotten so far because of sheer luck. Although the Guild of Magic, the Tower of Dusk, which had been established for 6 to 7 years, was incredibly wealthy, he felt that they did not have any foundation, and Lin Li was just a nouveau rich. Hence, he did not believe that such a guild would produce elite talents. Hence, when he saw around 100 legendary mages suddenly appearing on the Tower of Dusk's side, Candyman was almost going to lose his mind. However, he probably did not know it, and was still screaming ignorantly in exasperation. When the hundreds of legendary mages attacked at the same time, they caused the one-eyed dwarf to retreat out of the Tower of Dusk's second line of defense. Even though they were only pseudo-legendary mages, the legendary level magic spells were definitely truly at the legendary level, with the enhancement of the ice and fire natural domain. The undead creatures that were surrounding the line of defense barely lasted even a second before they were blasted into ashes by the storm of legendary level magic spells. Only the 10 legendary level greater demons that were summoned by the Blood Elf could barely survive the magic storm by relying on their high resistance to magic. However, after the magic storm passed, the greater demons did not impatiently continue to attack the Tower of Dusk, but instead turned back to look at the Blood Elf. When the Blood Elf threw out some soul beads, the greater demons finally roared and attacked the Tower of Dusk's line of defense. These greedy and insatiable demons are simply more disgusting than those human mercenaries. The Blood Elf, who had once again spent some soul beads, cursed angrily. "Ha! Shouldn't you have known what they are like from the first time you summoned a demon?" The serpentine woman Vesha said with a coquettish laugh before throwing out 24 poles that were shining brilliantly which were totem poles that were the special weapons of the orcs. The 24 totem poles expanded after the serpentine woman Vesha tossed them up into the sky, as if they had been inflated. In the blink of an eye, they turned into thick pillars that had the diameter of a human waist. The pillars were covered in complex and beautiful patterns while glistening with colorful light. They continuously rotated around the people. At this moment, the second wave of magic storm at the Tower of Dusk's side had already begun blasting at the few enemy powerhouses. However, before the magic storm even landed, the disheveled serpentine woman Vesha suddenly let out an ear-piercing whistle, leaving those around her with no choice but to cover their ears. As Vesha shrieked, the 24 totem poles quickly condensed and rotated rapidly. At the same time, a wild beast phantom appeared on each of the totem poles. Among the phantoms, there were arrogant white wolves, majestic brute bulls, sinister giant pythons, domineering lions, and so on. There were even the sacred beasts, the behemoth beasts. Although those were only phantoms, each one of them gave off legendary level magical waves, and it was akin to the appearance of 24 legendary powerhouses. They roared at the sky at the same time, sending invisible waves at the magic storm. There was a loud boom in the sky, and the 24 beast phantoms suddenly became a little distorted while the totem poles quaked to the point of falling. However, the magic storm of the Tower of Dusk was also disintegrated amidst the loud boom. The mages under Candyman were not affected thanks to Vesha's protection. However, Candyman had a sullen expression. Although his subordinates had avoided the magic bombardment launched by the Tower of Dusk, they were frightened by Vesha's shrilling whistle. HMPH. They're indeed only able to cast legendary level magic spells by relying on external forces, the serpentine woman Vesha said with a humph. While manipulating the 24 totems to counterattack, she explained to the people around her, from the interaction just now, I've already sensed that the nomological power contained in their magic spells comes from the same source. Each mage had their own unique understanding of the world laws, and the same applied for the identical fire elemental laws. Since hundreds of legendary mages cast magic spells at the same time, there ought to be hundreds of types of comprehension of the laws. Even if they used the same magic spells, there would definitely be differences. Although Vesha was not a mage, she was an orc, one shaman, who held the 24 totem poles, and was already going to step into the sanctuary realm soon. Her understanding of the laws would definitely be not any less than mages. In fact, her perception would be clearer with the power of the totem poles. However, the news from Vesha did not let them breathe a sigh of relief. After all, regardless of the methods they used, the legendary level magic spells that were cast were substantial, and those that had to die or get injured suffered their rightful fate. Is that the eternal furnace of High Lord Osric? I really didn't expect that such a small force like the Tower of Dusk would have so many good things. Unfortunately, they're going to be wasted in their hands. Staring at the eternal furnace at the top of the tower, the blood elf couldn't help but lick his lips. Stop talking about that. We'd better think about how to attack and get in. Otherwise, what can we obtain by just standing here? Sandoz did not stop the tide of death for a single moment. Hence, even though the Tower of Dusk had annihilated a large batch of undead creatures, the 5 death vortexes were still spitting out a steady stream of them. At this moment, the one-eyed dwarf that had been blasted back stood in front of the few of them again. Faced with the people opposite, he cowardly cursed, "Damn it, if I had the Sky Breaker, I'd shoot those lousy things down." Sky Breaker? You probably haven't even seen one yourself, so think of something practical, the blood elf said with a look of disdain, while raising the staff in his hand. The gem on top of the staff flashed, and the skies that were originally clear immediately turned dark, blocking out all the natural light, as if it was the darkest moment before the dawn. Next, in the open space in front of the blood elf, a massive 6-pointed star array appeared once again, after which a large abyssal demon dragon gradually emerged from the array. It was a greenish-black abyssal demon dragon that was surrounded by churning black flames, and had a pair of wings on its back that was covered with dark golden patterns, looking like magic symbols. However, to Evrion's surprise, there was a broken horn on the head of the abyssal demon dragon's head. It was jagged and seemed to have been broken off with brute force. "Jor, it's you again. It seems we haven't settled the score last time," the abyssal demon dragon yelled at the blood elf, instead of charging directly into the battlefield as soon as it emerged. Seeing such a situation, a few people next to the blood elf could not help but quietly move further away. Even though they were at the peak of the legendary realm, they dared not easily provoke the abyssal demon dragon. "Haha, respected Lord Keel, I summoned you this time precisely with the intentions of settling scores. I just hope that we can strike a deal before we settle the scores." Clearly, the blood elf Jor did not take the abyssal demon dragon Keel's threat to heart. To him, it was a piece of cake to fool such a brainless abyssal demon dragon. Next, the two of them chatted about something and the abyssal demon dragon Keel nodded as expected. Without saying anything else, it turned towards the Tower of Dusk's team and leapt at them. After flapping its fleshy wings twice, it had already flown past the Tower of Dusk's line of defense. It spat out its dragon breath, which was in the form of black flames, burning two greater demons that were attacking the line of defense. Damn it, Jor, you really have a connection with Keel. When we return, I'll let my race refuse your summoning forever. When a greater demon saw his companion being burned by the black flames, he immediately cursed. He wanted to turn around to see what was going on, but he did not expect to see the abyssal demon dragon, which was the enemy of greater demons. Shut up, minion, can you still go back? The abyssal demon dragon roared, and leapt forward abruptly. It managed to seize the remaining greater demons effortlessly, stuffing them into his mouth one by one. He chewed incessantly, and the juice splattered everywhere as if he was eating some delicacy. After swallowing several greater demons in the blink of an eye, the abyssal demon dragon finally began preparing to get down to business. The dark gold patterns on its fleshy wings lit up, and a powerful dark magic storm blasted at the Tower of Dusk's line of defense. The abyssal demon dragon Keel was worthy of being at the peak of the legendary level. Its frenzied bombardment caused the Tower of Dusk's line of defense to flicker dimly and end up on the verge of collapsing. However, the team from the Tower of Dusk had clearly gotten used to the endless attacks and means of the enemies. The appearance of the abyssal demon dragon could not do much to them. Although they could not see the hope of defeating the enemy to resolve the crisis, they did not feel helpless because of their impending death either. After all, the powerful eternal furnace was so strong that it might not be easily destroyed even by sanctuary powerhouses. To the people of the Tower of Dusk, the only issue was whether or not their president would return, and whether or not he had really died in the Sky Castle. Although some of them remembered that Lin Li was delayed for 6 months when he explored the Sky Castle for the first time because of some reasons. Could the same thing happen twice? The mages who retaliated in the eternal furnace were all members of the Tower of Dusk. Although there were not many elites, learning the magic net array was mandatory for all mages. Under the circumstances where the previous magic storm was unsuccessful, and they were faced with the abyssal demon dragon summoned by the enemies, they immediately changed their strategy and formed the magic net array to unite everyone. The mages who were in the eternal furnace had already gained legendary level power under the effects of the ice and fire natural domain. Back when he was exploring Prince Bahir's mausoleum, Lin Li brought with him a team of archmages who could already have legendary level combat power with the help of the magic net array. Now, the magic net array united mages that could be considered legendary mages, and the combat power they had was terrifying. The hundreds of legendary mages could not be considered to have just stepped into the legendary realm, as the ice and fire natural domain was equivalent to their magical domain. Even if they were not at level 21 yet, they were close. Through the magic net array, the mana and mental strength of numerous legendary mages were united. Although they could not contend with the sanctuary powerhouses, their combat power was definitely top-notch. At least at the peak of the legendary realm, the abyssal demon dragon Keel was destroying the Tower of Dusk's line of defense manically, and had even caused numerous defensive alchemy arrays to stop operating. An opening was about to be formed from the line of defense. However, at this moment, there was a sudden violent tremor in space, and a frightening mana wave flew out of the eternal furnace towards the abyssal demon dragon. That was a magic spell that was at the peak of the legendary level, which was jointly cast by hundreds of legendary mages. It was known as the instantaneous ice purgatory, which was the pinnacle of ice element magic spells. In the blink of an eye, it would be able to make the temperature of the space it engulfed drop to 0 and freeze everything in it. Legend had it that very few mages could cast that magic spell ever since it was created by the god of mages, Garesco. Even though it was known by many people, it was extremely difficult to cast, and even the legendary mages who could cast it would only do so as a last resort, when they were extremely hopeless. The reason was that although the power of the instantaneous ice purgatory was terrifying, it would cause legendary mages including those at the peak of the realm to exhaust all their mana. It was far less reliable than other magic spells. At least they would still have the strength to escape even if they could not defeat the enemies when casting other magic spells. Although the instantaneous ice purgatory did not have any shocking appearance when it was cast, and seemed like an ordinary haze that was condensed from diamond dust, it was still glistening brightly under all sorts of rays of light. It resembled snow particles that were blown up into the air by a gale. In fact, they could even feel the chilliness coming from it. One could only see its terror from the space in between the cracks of the ice. The moment the instantaneous ice purgatory was cast, the abyssal demon dragon could also feel the danger within it. It had no choice but to give up the Tower of Dusk's line of defense, while its massive body dodged to the side. The abyssal demon dragon's body was far stronger than the Wyrm's, not to mention, it was at the peak of the legendary realm, and was about to enter the sanctuary realm. However, even then, it dared not belittle the power of that ball of dust. It subconsciously wanted to avoid it. The instantaneous ice purgatory landed on the ground and exploded silently. All the space it enveloped immediately froze. The abyssal demon dragon managed to dodge in time, but it was just a subconscious reaction. After all, the abyssal demon dragon did not estimate the power of the instantaneous ice purgatory correctly, thus causing the extent of evasion to be insufficient. Although its massive body successfully evaded it, its tail landed in the instantaneous ice purgatory. The tip of the abyssal demon dragon's tail was immediately covered in white frost that quickly crept up the abyssal demon dragon's body. Even though the abyssal demon dragon was no longer within the area enveloped by the instantaneous ice purgatory, the low temperature of the instantaneous ice purgatory was not restricted to that area. The surrounding environment would also be affected. Hence, in the process of dodging, the layer of white frost spread rapidly from the tip of the abyssal demon dragon's tail all the way to its body. The white frost was initially just a faint layer, but in the blink of an eye, the intensity increased, and it even turned the abyssal demon dragon into a snow sculpture. However, the abyssal demon dragon had dodged even deadlier attacks, after all, and it was not a problem for him to resist the power that overflowed from the instantaneous ice purgatory. Indeed, when the dragon-shaped ice sculpture landed on the ground with a loud boom, the snow on its body was shaken off due to the vibration too. However, those with sharp eyes would definitely be able to see that the scales on the abyssal demon dragon had changed drastically in color. It might not have gotten frostbite, but it was definitely affected. He was reduced to such a pathetic state by a group of humans. The abyssal demon dragon Keel was infuriated. Even among the abyssal demon dragons, he was a peak powerhouse. How could he have been provoked by a bunch of humans who were like insignificant minions? He no longer cared about the Tower of Dusk's line of defense, and simply flapped the fleshy wings on its back. Its large body then sprung up in the air, and flew towards the eternal furnace at the top of the Tower of Dusk. Bang, bang! The large body of the abyssal demon dragon immediately became a target for the magical crystal cannons in the air. During his flight towards the eternal furnace, the mana cannons blasted at his body continuously, but the abyssal demon dragon was not bothered at all. Although he could not absorb the power of the mana cannons and make it his own like the dwarves could, the power of the mana cannons could not really hurt his body. Resisting the mana cannons, the abyssal demon dragon finally flew to the height of the eternal furnace, but before he could attack it, a large number of powerful magic spells darted out of the eternal furnace. The offensive spells immediately bombarded it, and its huge body swayed backward like a boat in a storm amidst the magic spells. Atrocious. These damned minions. The abyssal demon dragon Keel was a famous figure even in the endless abyss. He had always been the one to teach others a lesson, and thus had never felt that helpless. Candyman and the rest below were watching the situation with sullen expressions. They did not expect that the eternal furnace would exert such astonishing combat power. Unless a sanctuary powerhouse appeared, it would be a far-fetched idea to break the eternal furnace. Let Keel attract the attacks from the eternal furnace, while the rest of you attack the Tower of Dusk. I refuse to believe that a small force like the Tower of Dusk would be infallible. Candyman yelled viciously. He was filled with endless fury after his attack failed again. However, at this moment, Candyman and the others somehow felt their hearts palpitate as the surrounding air seemed to have become much denser. It even seemed a little difficult for them to breathe. Before they could even get a clear idea of where that came from, they could see a massive figure flying over towards them. What's that? Candyman could certainly see that the huge shadow was definitely not some dark cloud. However, apart from a dark cloud, he could think of nothing else that could fly in the air with such a huge volume. All of a sudden, a thought popped up in Candyman's head. As a member of the Supreme Council, he definitely knew that the Sky Garden belonging to the Supreme Council was actually a city in the sky. Although he had never seen the Sky Garden flying low, an insuppressible fear surged from the bottom of his heart when he thought about the massive size of the Sky Garden, and looked at the large shadow that was flying past. Candyman didn't guess wrongly. The massive shadow was indeed a sky castle. However, he thought that it was the Sky Garden of the Supreme Council, and that the three arbitrators had found out about his operation this time, and came to provide aid with the Sky Garden. In reality, Candyman would never guess that although it was indeed a sky castle, it was one that truly belonged to Lin Li, and the Tower of Dusk New Street rise at N. Vel. B. I. N. Co. After speaking to Pope Rosario in person, Lin Li moved the sky castle back to the Tower of Dusk. Although the two were very far away from each other, it only took the fast-flying sky tower a few hours to arrive. Besides, Lin Li and the rest were not flying at full speed, because they wanted to look at the scenery below. Knowing that he had left Anral for 3 years, Lin Li could already make a rough guess about the current situation of the Tower of Dusk even if he did not deliberately try to find out. However, he was still rather confident in the power of the Eternal Furnace, and he knew that if the Tower of Dusk were to really encounter any trouble, it could still stay strong with the help of the Eternal Furnace. Hence, when the Sky Castle flew close to the Tower of Dusk, and he saw the fierce battle below the Tower of Dusk, Lin Li did not seem too surprised. He, the leader of the Tower of Dusk who was in the Sanctuary Realm, left with the elite mages, and they were absent for 3 years without any news from them. It was only right for there to be some troublemakers. However, the rest of the Tower of Dusk, especially the leader of the mages, Alan, as well as the other mages, couldn't tolerate it when they saw the situation. Before they left, they were already the top force of the Breezy Plains, and every force in the Breezy Plains had to show respect to the Tower of Dusk. It had only been a short while, and yet some forces tried to attack them. President, let's go and wipe out those senseless bastards. At this moment, Alan, the leader of the mages, naturally stood up in response to the crowd's clamoring, and requested Lin Li to join the battle. Yes, but not by yourselves. Do you remember what you have learned during this time? Have everyone go and prepare immediately. We need to show the power of the Sky Castle to everyone in Anral now. While giving out the orders, Lin Li fiddled with the control crystal. The scenery around the higher floors was also continuously changing with it. Yes, President, Alan responded without looking at the scenery that was constantly changing. He immediately and eagerly got his subordinates to get ready. During this period of time, the main task of Alan and the other mages was to familiarize themselves with the operation of the Sky Castle. Although the Sky Castle was not like the Sky Garden that had been modified, the mages could still get familiar with it easily. After all, even Lin Li could not fully exert the power of the Sky Castle now. Hence, it was enough for the mages to master some simple operations for the time being. While Alan was leading the others to make preparations, the scene of the Tower of Dusk being attacked could be seen on the walls of the control room. The abyssal demon dragon in the sky, the undead creatures on the ground, and the hundreds of mages could be seen. At last, the image was fixed on Candyman and the others. Looking at the figures of those people, Lin Li reached out and stroked his chin while smilingly saying to Basil, "Seems like these are the leaders who have been directing the attacks at the Tower of Dusk this time. I have to admit, they're really lucky. There are not many who can die below a Sky Castle in this era." Although it was clear from the chaotic battlefield below that the Tower of Dusk had suffered a major loss as well, there was not a single trace of anger in Lin Li's voice. It was not that Lin Li was gracious and magnanimous, but rather that those enemies were already dead to him. There was nothing to be angry about with the dead. "Is that Mage Candyman of the Garesco City Guild of Magic?" asked Basil, who was standing next to Lin Li as he suddenly recognized Candyman in the images. He couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. "Isn't Candyman from the Supreme Council? What is he doing here?" Candyman, Lin Li had really almost forgotten about the guy who had yelled at him during the meeting held by the Supreme Council and got chased out by Apophis. After Basil's reminder, he finally remembered who Candyman was, but it was mostly because of Garesco City, which had a special name. However, although he remembered such a person, Lin Li did not pay much attention to it. He shook his head slightly and said, "Who cares where he's from? Since he dared to invade the Tower of Dusk, we'll let him die here." Although Candyman had a fairly high status in the Supreme Council, Lin Li did not take him seriously at all. Even if the 3 arbitrators of the Supreme Council had not promised to make Lin Li the 4th arbitrator, he still wouldn't have let Candyman off easily. Soon, Alan's voice could be heard coming from the control room. The mages who reported to Lin Li had already gotten into their respective positions and were ready to enter the battle. There was some excitement in Alan's voice. After all, it was the first time that he was using the Sky Castle in a battle. "Good, start attacking," Lin Li instructed Alan calmly after glancing around the battlefield. At this moment, the entire battlefield below the Sky Castle was enveloped by the massive shadow. Candyman and the others were staring at the Sky Castle in shock with their eyes and mouths wide open. Even though they could not see what was going on above the Sky Castle, the bottom, which was like an upside-down mountain peak, reminded him of the legendary Sky Castles. "Candyman, did the Supreme Council find out about this operation?" Sandoz asked with some panic in his voice. He was not afraid of the Sky Castle. After all, the power of the Sky Castle only existed in legends. What he feared was the 3 arbitrators on board the Sky Castle. They were powerhouses who were at the peak of the Sanctuary Realm, and were godlike figures who came from the Dark Age. "No." Candyman swallowed hard with a sullen expression, and said to the crowd, "It's not the Supreme Council. It's not the Sky Garden of the Supreme Council." Candyman had been a member of the Supreme Council for many years, and although he was not extremely familiar with the Sky Garden, he at least had a deep impression of it. Hence, The bottom of the sky castle, that was like an upside-down mountain peak, allowed him to immediately deduce that it was not the Sky Garden of the Supreme Council. However, if it was not the Supreme Council's Sky Garden, where would a sky castle come from? Other than the Supreme Council, there seemed to be no other force in Anral that had such an overpowered weapon like the Sky Castle. Could it be? Kanyaman was suddenly a little afraid to think about it. He still remembered the rumor about the president of the Tower of Dusk, which claimed that Lin Li had brought his men to explore the Sky Castle of the Immortal King. However, Lin Li had been gone for 3 years without any news of them, and many thought that he had died in the Sky Castle. However, if the Sky Castle that suddenly appeared above their heads was not the Sky Garden of the Supreme Council, there would only be one possibility left, and that was that Lin Li, who had disappeared for 3 years, had returned with the ownership of the Immortal King's Sky Castle. It's not the Sky Garden. I heard that the president of the Tower of Dusk went missing because he went to explore Sky Castle. Is he the one controlling this Sky Castle? The Blood Elf's words were exactly what Kanyaman was thinking. However, he did not sound too worried or horrified. Instead, there was uncontrollable excitement in his tone. Kanyaman, look how timid you are. You've turned completely pale. Why don't you think about it? Do you really think anyone can gain the ownership of the Immortal King's Sky Castle? Even if the Sky Castle was activated, how much power can it exert? The one-eyed dwarf mocked in disdain when he noticed how worried Kanyaman looked. Kanyaman was immediately angered by his words. However, on second thought, he decided to suppress the anger he felt. Yeah. The Sky Garden of the Supreme Council has undergone a large-scale modification ever since it was obtained by the Supreme Council and become a human Sky Castle. Even if that kid Falik can start moving the Sky Castle, what can he do within 3 short years? How can he fully exert the power of the Sky Castle? At the thought of this, Kanyaman's horror immediately vanished, and his eyes even glistened with greed. If he could obtain the Sky Castle and then acquire all of the Tower of Dusk's businesses, his Guild of Magic would probably become the best Guild of Magic in the entire Anral in no time. Of course, Kanyaman wouldn't be so conceited as to think that he could contend with the Supreme Council just by owning a Sky Castle. However, there was probably no force below the Supreme Council that could be on par with him if he had the Sky Castle. Kanyaman now already treated that Sky Castle as his own. As for the others, they were undoubtedly looking at the Sky Castle with glistening eyes. As the strongest weapon in the entire Anral and the crystallization of the civilization of the High Elves, there was probably no one in Anral who wouldn't yearn to own it. However, just as the people below were thinking about it and even forgot to continue attacking the Tower of Dusk, the Sky Castle above them suddenly launched meteors. There were nearly 100 meteors, which were each emitting astonishing mana waves and slashing through the sky towards Kanyaman, trailing brilliant rays of light. Damn, he's attacking us. Danton, the dwarf, made a useless remark and raised his giant axe in exasperation. He actually wanted to resist the attack from the Sky Castle head-on. However, the others including Kanyaman were not as reckless as Danton, as they all wanted to dodge. Despite not knowing what terrifying power the attack contained, they could guess that it was definitely not something that the magical crystal cannons could compare to. Indeed, not to mention their power, the shots of the magical crystal cannons traveled in a straight line, and they could dodge them easily. However, the attack from the Sky Castle, which was in the form of brilliant meteors, seemed to have a life of its own. When the people below were dodging, the meteors automatically changed direction and continued to chase them. Boom! The first to be attacked were not the ones who were fleeing or the one-eyed dwarf Danton, who was in the mood to fight them toe-to-toe. Instead, it was the team of mages under Kanyaman. Although Kanyaman's Guild of Magic was named after the god of mages Garesko, his mages did not inherit the ability to deploy the magic net array that was created by Garesko. Hence, the numerous legendary mages and the hundreds of other mages could not gather all their strength for defense. Only the leader of the mages could exhibit his magical domain to protect the mages. However, when a meteor blasted the magical domain, the leader of the mages immediately regretted his decision. Had he known that that would happen, he would have fled on his own. However, there was no cure for regret. The meteor immediately shattered the magical domain and landed among the mages. Amidst the roars, a small sun rose in the middle of the group of mages, and the bright, dazzling light instantly engulfed everything around it. Those that were engulfed by the light, be it archmages or legendary mages, were all too powerless to resist. Just like ice and snow under the sun, they were melting quickly in the light. Kanyaman and the powerhouses who were at the peak of the legendary realm did not have time to care about it. No matter how they sped up and changed direction, the meteors would chase them like maggots sticking to a bone. Soon, Kanyaman's subordinate, the deputy president of the Guild of Magic and a level 23 legendary mage, had a meteor smashed against his back. Before the legendary mage could struggle, 2, 3, and even more meteors came from behind. In the blink of an eye, the continuous bursts of light engulfed him completely. The one-eyed dwarf Danton, who was ready to fight hard, finally realized that something was wrong, and turned around to run away with the giant axe. However, he was not fast, and his reaction was slow too. Hence, it was already too late by the time he wanted to run. In the blink of an eye, meteors smashed into Danton's body, leaving him with no chance to dodge at all. The one-eyed dwarf's ability to devour the power of mana cannons had lost its effectiveness at this moment. By the time the light from the meteors dissipated, the sturdy axe had vanished out of sight too. The powerhouse, who was at the peak of the legendary level and was a dwarf warrior, who had awakened his bloodline, was thus erased from the world of Anril. The serpentine woman Vesha wagged her snake tail, and quickly fled into the distance while the 24 totem poles surrounding her constantly radiated bright rays of light. The shadows of the beasts on the totems flew out of the totem poles and charged at the meteors that were constantly chasing them. It took the dissipation of 3 beast shadows for a meteor to be destroyed. The totem poles, which had lost their shadows, also became dull, as if they had lost all their power. However, there was more than one meteor behind the serpentine Lady Vesha. When there was only one totem pole flickering beside her, she finally blocked all the meteors that were coming after her. However, even then, Vesha did not stop running away, and the only thing she could think about was that the further she fled, the better. Among all of them, the blood elf was in a good position. With the power of darkness, as well as his inherent agility, he managed to escape danger even though he seemed extremely disheveled because of the pursuit. Besides, in the process of escape, he also constantly summoned brainless low-level demons from the abyss as meat shields against meteors pursuing him. On the other hand, Necromancer Sandoz initially wanted to try using his undead creatures to block the terrifying meteors, but as the meteors landed, the undead creatures that he summoned soon vanished. Even the vortex doors of the Tide of Death were blown apart. Hence, there were no undead creatures. Besides, Sandoz could also feel that with the explosions of the meteors, the light elements in the space had become increasingly dense, almost close to catching up with the so-called brilliance halls. Under such circumstances, even if Sandoz did not get blasted by the meteors, he would probably be in an even more dangerous situation than the others. At the thought of this, Sandoz gritted his teeth and scurried away in a mess. While doing so, he took out a magic scroll. As it was stimulated, an antique gate appeared out of nowhere in front of Sandoz. It was an extremely rare teleportation scroll. Moreover, the incomparably solid appearance of the gate was evidence that it was definitely a valuable legendary scroll, which would probably be able to send one hundreds of kilometers away in one go. "I'm sorry. I will take revenge for all of you later," Sandoz muttered in a grim tone. Not daring to delay any longer, he charged straight into the ancient gate. Seeing that Sandoz actually used the high-level teleportation scroll alone, the rest of the crowd were filled with resentment. If Sandoz had used it when everyone was together, the power of the high-level teleportation scroll would have been enough to get everyone out. However, they now had to scurry everywhere while being chased by the meteors. They did not have the time to go to the entrance of the teleportation scroll at all. "You are right in front of me, and you still want to escape." Just when the crowd was fleeing and cursing Sandoz in their hearts, an indifferent voice suddenly came from the sky, followed by a large opening in midair. They looked up to see an extremely young mage, who was holding a staff in one hand, and Sandoz, who had just tried to flee, in his other. He stepped out of the opening composedly. "Fulik, hurry and make these meteors stop. Do you know whom you're attacking? Do you want to betray the Supreme Council?" exclaimed a disheveled Candyman, who started hollering in exasperation and frustration when he saw Lin Li turning around all of a sudden in midair. Of course, he knew that he could not resolve the feud between him and the Tower of Dusk, but he believed that as long as he could escape this immediate disaster, he wouldn't be punished too severely given his position in the Supreme Council. Lin Li did not reply to Candyman, and instead raised Sandoz's hand effortlessly, as if it was weightless. Besides, not to mention that Sandoz was just a bunch of bones, even if he was a strong and burly man, he would pose no threat to Lin Li at all. Sandoz, who had been lifted up by Lin Li single-handedly, had initially already stopped struggling, but no one saw what Lin Li had done. They could only see Sandoz acting like a madman all of a sudden as he shrieked while struggling. At the same time, wisps of white flames gradually appeared on his thin and dry body. Hearing the screams, everyone couldn't help but look at them, and they immediately understood the reason for Sandoz's reaction. The wisps of white flames were exactly the celestial purification fire that was rumored to be able to purify all the filth in the world. Everyone could not help but feel a sudden chill in their hearts. Without a doubt, the young president of the Tower of Dusk was using such a method to tell everyone about the consequences of invading the Tower of Dusk's territory. Sandoz's shrieks and the meteors that were chasing them incessantly put them on the verge of a mental breakdown. "Fulik, if you dare to kill me." The 3 arbitrators, will definitely seek justice for me," Kanyaman exclaimed, bringing up the three arbitrators because he was already in a dead end, and that was his last resort. He hoped that that would make Lin Li think twice, but he seemed to have forgotten that he was thrown out mercilessly by arbitrator Apophis, precisely because he had gone against Lin Li. However, how would Kanyaman know that Lin Li had long been selected as the fourth arbitrator by the three arbitrators? Moreover, even without the identity of the fourth arbitrator, the three arbitrators still wouldn't say or do anything to stop Lin Li if he wanted to kill Kanyaman. However, Lin Li did not kill Kanyaman immediately, and instead quickly moved in another direction on the battlefield. There were three who were doing their best to resist the attacks of the meteors, two of which were sword sages dressed in dark gold armor. The other one was a legendary mage, who seemed to be in his 30s, and was shielded by the sword sages. Clearly, he had an extraordinary status, especially since the two sword sages seemed even more nervous, and showed their intent to protect him after Lin Li appeared. However, the legendary mage did not panic when he saw Lin Li appearing, and instead even sized Lin Li up as he seemed to be in the mood to do so. Then, he unhurriedly said, "You must be the president of the Tower of Dusk. You're very competent. Moreover, you've now even obtained the legendary Sky Castle. I had no choice but to do that previously, because I couldn't find you. Since you have returned, let's have a discussion." The legendary mage's words made Lin Li feel stunned for a while. He thought that the legendary mage would either directly fight him head-on or get down and beg for mercy, but he did not expect to hear such words from him. Besides, he did not sound like he was begging for mercy at all, and instead seemed to have a sense of superiority, as if he had the upper hand. Lin Li did not know if the legendary mage was calm, or just had a sense of superiority. Lin Li asked with some derision, "Oh, what do you want to talk about? Stop your attacks first. You've already killed Sandoz and Danton. If you kill others, I'm afraid that we will really reach the point of no return," the legendary mage said proudly. Lin Li was a little amused. Initially, he thought that that legendary mage could remain calm because he had a good control over his mentality and emotions. However, he turned out to be someone who failed to get a clear idea of the situation. He naturally did not follow his instructions and stop attacking the rest. Instead, he said, "Seems like you're the commander who's in charge of the attack against the Tower of Dusk. HMPH, that fool Kanyaman isn't fit to lead us at all." The legendary mage admitted to Lin Li's conjecture nonchalantly, ignoring the gazes of those around him. He then considerately said, "You can't know my identity yet, but I'm just going to tell you that I'm the only one who can recruit you, so you'd better stop attacking immediately. Otherwise, you'll not only lose the chance to join us, but you'll also become our greatest enemy." The legendary mage's words were somewhat beyond Lin Li's expectations. He initially thought that it was Kanyaman's intention to attack the Tower of Dusk, and that the necromancer and blood elf etc. were just hired to help him. However, it seemed that there was an unknown force helping Kanyaman, and allowing him to go against the rules of the Supreme Council. Clearly, the strength of this unknown force was probably not too inferior to that of the Supreme Council, even though it could not be on par with it. Seeing this situation, the serpentine woman Vesha dared not procrastinate at all. She took out a silver mask, and held it in her hands. Two rays of light shot out at Lin Li through the eye holes of the mask. That was the special magical weapon of the snakes, the Medusa's touch, which would instantly turn anyone, or any object that was hit by the light into stone. If Lin Li was only at the legendary realm, he would probably have to put in some effort to resist it, but unfortunately, being in the sanctuary realm meant a fundamental change in his understanding of the world. The petrifying light was not a big deal to him at all. Viciat and Velb, N, C, M for L test Vels. Faced with the incoming petrifying light, Lin Li simply waved his hand gently, causing the two rays of light to immediately change direction as they accurately shone on the serpentine woman Vesha. With a shrill shriek, her body turned into a dull gray stone sculpture. "Your turn, Kanyaman." When Lin Li appeared in front of Kanyaman again, the latter was the only one left on the battlefield. "Wait, I admit defeat, but I want the Supreme Council to judge and sanction me for my sins." Kanyaman had initially wanted to make the last struggle, but he just wanted to survive now. Once he headed to the Supreme Council and pulled some careful tricks, he might be able to turn the situation around. Unfortunately, Lin Li was not afraid of what Kanyaman was going to do, but he was afraid of trouble. How could he let the Supreme Council deal with Kanyaman? He glanced at the frightened Kanyaman composedly, and slowly raised his arm while pointing his finger forward. Boom! The entire space seemed to have cracked because of Lin Li's action, while Kanyaman, who was in that space, could not make a single sound at all. He was torn into bits amidst countless spatial cracks, and devoured by the void, thus leaving nothing behind. President Gavin and the others had seen the appearance of the Sky Castle, but due to the fact that the Sky Castle's attacks would not differentiate between foe and friend, They dared not leave the Tower of Dusk without permission. When they saw Lin Li killing all the fleeing enemies on the battlefield, they finally knew that their president had returned. Taking the mages of the Tower of Dusk with him, Gavin quickly arrived in front of Lin Li and suppressed his feelings of agitation, while saying to Lin Li with guilt written all over his face, "President, I've you down the past 3 years. Enough. You've already done well. I didn't expect that I'd be away for 3 years. Otherwise, I would have left a few more people behind to help you man the Tower of Dusk, and things wouldn't have turned out this way." Lin Li waved his hand and told Gavin not to hold it against himself. Actually, Lin Li had a greater responsibility for this. He believed that if he had left a few powerhouses behind to take charge of the Tower of Dusk, or perhaps even made the Retribution Knights or the Mage Legion stay behind, no one would have dared to bully the Tower of Dusk that brazenly. "Flick, what's that thing in the sky? Did you really drive the Sky Castle back here?" Jarian and the mages of the Eternal Furnace scurried over from behind together with Gavin. Wilkinson, the other pharmacists, and technical elites of other fields were following behind Jarian. When they first saw Lin Li, they eagerly wanted to rush forward to greet him and pour their woes out to him. However, when they heard Jarian's question, they immediately fell silent and looked at Lin Li eagerly, waiting to hear his exact answer. Since he had already driven the Sky Castle back, there was nothing for Lin Li to hide anymore. Hence, he nodded and said, "Yeah, that's the Sky Castle that we went to explore. The others are still up there. They were the ones who launched the attack." Upon hearing Lin Li's exact answer, everyone jumped for joy and excitement after staying silent for a while. A mere eternal furnace had already made the Tower of Dusk become an invincible place. Now, they even had a real Sky Castle. No one dared to imagine what the Sky Castle would be like in the future. "Okay, the battle here has ended. Everyone, just follow me and go up to take a look," Lin Li said smilingly. He then chanted an incantation softly, and a large teleportation door opened in front of them. "Is it really possible? Oh my god, it's the legendary Sky Castle. I knew it. I said that the president will be fine. Look, he has even driven the Immortal King's Sky Castle back. I wonder if those who have been spreading rumors can still sleep after receiving this news. Yeah, and those forces who have terminated their business relations to us. This time, even if they kneel down in front of us, we will only give in based on our mood." The members of the Tower of Dusk were talking with each other excitedly while lining up and entering the teleportation portal. It seemed that there were a lot of scores to settle. Lin Li stood quietly by the side, and he could basically tell from their chatter what the members of the Tower of Dusk had experienced in the past 3 years. Lin Li had never been a kind and soft-hearted person. He would never be stingy with his own subordinates, but he wouldn't be gracious with his enemies. Simply put, he would pay his enemies back in their own coin. Once all of them had passed through the door of the teleportation portal and stepped onto the majestic Sky Castle, Lin Li was also about to follow them, but he remembered that there was a prisoner that he had left near them. It was not that Lin Li was forgetful, but rather that he was overjoyed to see that his subordinates were all right. Lin Li made Jarian and Gavin enter the teleportation portal before turning his head to look at the prisoner. He then reached his arm out to grab something in the void. There was a mana hand at the spot where the half-dead prisoner was, and it was reaching out and grabbing him. However, at this moment, there was a sudden fluctuation in the space, and another mana hand reached out to grab the captive on the ground. The two mana hands collided, and it did not seem to be a powerful magic spell. The captive it affected was simply blown to the side by an impact. "Ha," Lin Li said with a solemn expression. Although such means were not rare, only a sanctuary powerhouse could cast it. Without a doubt, the person who had attacked was a powerful sanctuary powerhouse. At this moment, an old voice sounded from afar. "President Flick, since your guild of magic did not suffer any losses, I'll take this kid away." After he said that, another wave of magic emerged from the void before grabbing the prisoner. What a joke. Since when does just anyone have the right to hold my people captive? Although Lin Li knew that the other party was in the sanctuary realm, and was not just a beginner, it did not mean that he had to show him respect. Anyway, he could tell that the other party was definitely not one of the few sanctuary powerhouses whom he was close to. Hence, Lin Li didn't hesitate at all. He pointed the Helios scepter, and rays of lightning crashed down onto the hand of Mana that was not far away. He then split it and made it disappear. "President Flick, I suggest that you don't act impulsively out of anger. You've already killed the others, but killing this person won't do you any good," said the old voice, seemingly suppressing his anger. "Sure, you can take him away, but before you do, I want to know what force you were from," said Lin Li, who wanted to keep the prisoner behind for the sake of finding out the force behind him. Otherwise, he would have long crushed him into powder. However, after hearing Lin Li's words, the old voice fell silent. Clearly, he did not expect that rascal to reveal such an important piece of information. "Since you don't want to answer, I'll go over and ask you. Throughout this period of time, Lin Li had already roughly estimated the other party's location, using the clues that he found when the latter was exhibiting the hand of mana. Hence, when he saw the other party remaining silent, Lin Li immediately summoned the debris of the stars, nothingness, and waved it in the air, causing a crack to form. It was about to pierce through space and strike that old man. However, before Lin Li even entered, he heard a sudden shriek coming from the spatial rift, immediately after which the clues that he was tracking vanished. It seemed that the other party's reaction was rather fast. When he sensed that Lin Li was going to catch him, he immediately vanished. Lin Li could but stop and turn around to pull the captive towards him. He then strode towards the door of the teleportation portal that led to the Sky Castle. Everything happened within less than 20 seconds, and thus no one in the Sky Castle noticed that Lin Li had lagged for that brief duration. However, Gavin, Jarian, and the others immediately rushed over while Lin Li was carrying the person who had passed out. President, who's this? Gavin knew that Lin Li was holding one of the enemies who had attacked the Tower of Dusk, but the latter did not stand out in the battles during this period of time. Hence, they did not know why Lin Li chose to kill all the leaders and leave this one behind. Lin Li tossed the prisoner onto the ground and said to Gavin and the others, "Lock this one up in the dungeon of the Sky Castle. Use whatever means it takes to interrogate him and identify the force behind him." "You mean Candyman isn't the culprit behind this attack against the Tower of Dusk?" Gavin couldn't help but be shocked when he heard the news. He frowned a little and said, "Lately, the peace in the breezy plains has been disrupted, and rumor has it that many of the local forces have been attacked by unknown forces. Initially, we thought that they were just making excuses, but it turns out that there's really such a force. Okay, the rest of you can look around. Let's go inside to chat. I'd like to hear what exactly has happened in the Tower of Dusk and Breezy Plains in the past 3 years." Lin Li sent the captive away and brought Jarian, Gavin, as well as the other senior executives of the Tower of Dusk to the central tower of the Sky Castle. They settled down in the hall on the first floor, and Gavin and the others began to tell Lin Li about what had happened in the past 3 years, as well as the various changes in the Breezy Plains and the Tower of Dusk. Actually, Lin Li knew the first and greatest change. There was a large number of mages who suddenly improved greatly in strength because of the magic tides. There were many who had also broken through the bottlenecks that they had been stuck in for a long time. At this juncture, Jarian squinted, and his chubby face vibrated continuously due to his laughter. He said, "Kid, did you notice? I'm now a legendary mage too." In fact, with Jarian's magical talent, he should at most reach level 15 or level 16. He only managed to reach the peak of level 19 thanks to the power of the Sky Castle's control crystal and the Tree of Eternity. However, the peak of level 19 could already be considered the maximum of Jarian's potential. There was almost no possibility of further advancement. When Lin Li left, he was already stuck at the bottleneck of the peak of level 19 for a long time. However, Jarian encountered the magic tides that occurred once in a blue moon, and this time they were on a much greater scale than before. With the power of the magic tides, the old Jarian finally broke through the bottleneck in one go, thus becoming a true legendary mage. Similarly, Gavin, who had always been in charge of the matters at the Tower of Dusk, had also entered the legendary realm. Many of the mages who had been eliminated from the Mage Legion had also reached the peak of level 19. Although Jarian knew that there was barely any hope for him to advance further in the legendary realm, Jarian did not care about it at all. What he cared about was his lifespan, which had increased by 180 years at once after he reached the legendary realm. That was the real reason for his happiness. Back then, old Merlin and I have been advancing together, and we've always been on par with each other. However, old Merlin probably would have never expected that I'd one day step into the legendary realm. So, having a longer lifespan is victory. The layers of fat in Jarian's face were pushed together, and he couldn't stop grinning widely. After praising himself for a long time, Jarian continued telling Lin Li about the current situation in the Breezy Plains, as well as the Tower of Dusk's future development in the Breezy Plains. At this moment, Gavin seemed to be guilt-ridden. After all, no matter what, the Tower of Dusk had changed drastically since Lin Li handed the Tower of Dusk to him. "Okay, get rid of that expression of yours. It's no big deal. Haven't I already told you long ago that being alive is the most important thing? As for those assets that we've lost, just take it that we're letting them safeguard them for 2 years. We'll take it back from them with added interest in the future," Lin Li said, waving his hand indifferently. Lin Li believed that as long as he spread the news about the fact that he had brought the Sky Castle back, those people would give him everything he needed without him having to do anything. In reality, just like what Lin Li thought, the news of his return with the Sky Castle immediately spread like wildfire in the Breezy Plains. After the Sky Castle flew over from the Leaden Kingdom and landed at the Tower of Dusk, the shock that that piece of news brought everyone was far greater than when Lin Li had entered the sanctuary realm at a young age. After all, the Sky Castle was something that only existed in legends and myths. Exploring it once was already an impressive feat, yet Lin Li even took possession of the entire Sky Castle. It was simply a legend of the era. Besides, that news was not difficult to verify. Those who went to Dulan City would be able to see the inverted mountain peak above the Tower of Dusk, which was forming a huge shadow on the ground. Other than the Sky Castle, what else in the world could float in the sky despite having such a large volume? After understanding the situation of the Tower of Dusk, Lin Li, Gavin, and the other senior executives discussed their following development strategy. The main reason for the decline of the Tower of Dusk in the past 3 years was that there was no real powerhouse to guard the Tower of Dusk. Now that Lin Li had returned with the Sky Castle, everything was naturally settled easily. Many forces had improved greatly due to the magic tides, and there were even many legendary powerhouses who managed to step into the sanctuary realm because of it. However, they knew that there was still a great difference between them and the Tower of Dusk now. Putting aside the sanctuary powerhouses, the Sky Castle alone was enough to make most forces fear him. After they were done making various plans for the development of the Tower of Dusk, the mages outside had already seen most of the Sky Castle. However, Lin Li did not intend to let all of them stay in the Sky Castle. After all, the foundation of the Tower of Dusk was on the ground, and the Tower of Dusk had yet to reach the level of the Supreme Council, which could rule over the entire Anral. Hence, Gavin brought them back to clean up the battlefield at the Tower of Dusk as well as the periphery of the Magic City so that the mages could stay there and learn. Of course, for the future task of sealing the Spacetime Rift, Lin Li had to arrange for someone to stay in the Sky Castle and assist in the operation. Therefore, he announced his decision that he would recruit the mages, who achieved excellent grades after an examination, and allow them to live in the Sky Castle, where they could learn about magic and the operation of some facilities in the Sky Castle. After those matters were settled, Lin Li didn't stay behind in the Sky Castle any longer. He activated the Sky Castle's defense system and brought his subordinates back to the Tower of Dusk. The two undead servants and the Retribution Knights returned to the Black Front Fortress to digest and assimilate all of the knowledge that they had received during this period of time. On the other hand, Connorus and Angelana were researching and working on some random things in the Eternal Furnace. The other members of the Tower of Dusk also immediately began studying intensely, perhaps because they missed the opportunity the magic tides had brought. After arranging everything, Lin Li went to the library of the Tower of Dusk by himself and placed all the magic books that he had collected in the tower under the Sky Castle on the bookshelves. The Tower of Dusk had not been established for long, and thus it did not have a strong foundation, unlike the other forces, which had a heritage of thousands of years. Hence, the library had never been full. Even though the quality of the magic books was very high, the scarcity of books still made it seem weird. However, the library finally looked decent after Lin Li placed some books in it. Now, the library of the Tower of Dusk was probably just as rich in resources and magical knowledge as that of the Supreme Council. In fact, it was probably even more comprehensive. Most importantly, the magic books that Lin Li had obtained this time were all written by Garesco, who had the characteristics of human mages in mind when he wrote them. Hence, they were magic books that truly belonged to humans. Although the human magic civilization had developed for more than 1,300 years since the end of the Dark Age, the crystallization of magic civilization that human mages now had was only limited to the magical knowledge below the legendary realm. After entering the legendary realm, most of the books they read were the magic books of the High Elves, which were at most translated and enhanced with some annotations of the predecessors. That resulted in a huge problem. Humans did not have a complete and unified magical knowledge system of their own. They had no choice but to inherit the magical knowledge system of the High Elves. However, humans were very different from High Elves. A clear difference was that the High Elves had long lifespans, while humans could only live at most up to a few hundred years, even if they were legendary powerhouses. Besides, the written language of the High Elves had always been known for its complexity and magnificence, which caused the translated text to vary in interpretation. The same text might be translated in 100 different ways by 100 different translators. If it was just a literature piece, there would be no problem with that, but the legendary realm involved the analysis and understanding of the elemental laws, and the most probable consequence would be a drastic difference between the intended meaning of the original text and the translated text. If a mage were to go on the wrong path in the legendary realm, then even if the possibility of it was not cut off entirely, the difficulty of him stepping into the sanctuary realm would be hundreds of times higher. That was also an important reason Why, although there had been countless magical geniuses, after 1,300 years of development of human magical civilization, there were very few who could enter the sanctuary realm. Only by perfectly understanding the basic laws of the world could one be familiar with the nature of the world, and become an existence that was closer to God's. If there was some deviation in the understanding of the basic world laws, how would one be able to see through the essence of the world? For human magical civilization, the period of more than 1,300 years was just like a period of figuring things out and advancing forward. The experience of the High Elves still belonged to the High Elves, after all, and would lead human magical civilization to a more deviant path. Some people might find the path to entering the legendary realm, but they might not be able to find the direction to the sanctuary realm. Some might have found the door to the sanctuary realm, but they might not be able to step through it. Previously, in the inverted tower of the Sky Castle, Lin Li passed the test of Garesko's incarnation, which had also said that the Immortal King and Garesko had gone on the wrong paths. The Immortal King, who had single-handedly created the prosperity of the High Elves dynasty, and Garesko, who was called the God of Mages, had both gone the wrong way. Clearly, it was extremely difficult to find the correct path without proper guidance. Besides, once one went wrong on the path of magic, it would basically be impossible to go back and start over. For example, Lin Li's teacher Andoin had chosen to use the Thorn domain as his magical domain, which had basically cut off the possibility of him stepping into the sanctuary realm in the future. It would be impossible for him to start all over again. Even Garesko and the Immortal King could not start again. Not to mention, Lin Li had yet to reach their level. Of course, even with the existence of the batch of human magical books, it did not mean that all human mages reading them would reach the sanctuary realm. After all, the problem of the development of magic civilization was not something that could be resolved by a single person, not even Garesko, who was known as the God of Mages. However, Lin Li was not in the mood for developing human magical civilization. After all, he had just stepped into the sanctuary realm, and what he was concerned about now was how he could increase his strength and that of the Tower of Dusk. With a batch of human magic books, Lin Li believed that the mages of the Tower of Dusk would not face major issues in reaching the sanctuary realm, as long as they had enough talent in magic. This time, the outbreak of the magic tides allowed the mages, who remained in the Tower of Dusk, to experience a qualitative leap in their abilities, but the increase in combat power was disproportionate. If those mages were to go against the other mages, whom Lin Li had brought to the Sky Castle, they would definitely lose terribly. After all, the people whom Lin Li had brought away had all experienced the tempering of countless intense battles. In terms of the use of mana and combat experience, the mages who'd stayed behind could not compare to them. It was just like when Lin Li was in a battle with Garesko's incarnation in the inverted tower of the Sky Castle. Garesko's incarnation was limited to level 25, but with his rich experience, he still managed to give Lin Li a hard time. Clearly, the gap between realms could not be made up for with technique, but the gap between levels could be compensated for. The magic tides allowed the mages who stayed behind in the Tower of Dusk to break through their bottlenecks and experience a huge increase in their power. However, with the help of the magical books, Lin Li believed that they would soon be able to turn their superficial power into actual combat power. In general, although Lin Li had left the Tower of Dusk for 3 years, and the development of the Tower of Dusk had taken a sharp turn for the worse in those 3 years, all the problems that they faced were no longer problems now that he had returned. While thinking about the development of the Tower of Dusk, Lin Li carefully sorted out the magic books and placed them on the bookshelves. However, when he put the last magic book on a shelf, he suddenly felt a majestic mana wave surging from behind him. At the instant that the mana wave surged, Lin Li immediately reacted and made his domain world engulf the space around him, before turning around to look behind him where the mana wave came from. Garesko. Lin Li couldn't help but be shocked when he saw the figure not far behind him. This is the library of the Tower of Dusk. Why is Garesko here? Thinking about the magic books that he had just placed on the shelves, Lin Li finally realized that the magic books contain the condensed mental strength of Garesko's incarnation. Since he placed the magic books there, Garesko's incarnation was naturally brought there too. Although Lin Li was a little surprised to see Garesko's incarnation, he was not nervous and worried about it. Instead, a strong excitement surged in his heart because he knew that the appearance of Garesko's incarnation would only be beneficial to him. The battles in the inverted tower of the Sky Castle allowed Lin Li to gain a lot from Garesko, which was not a gain inferior to his ownership of the Sky Castle. Although the Sky Castle was massive, it was just a material possession. After all, Lin Li could use it as a tool, but he could not rely on it completely. The improvement of his own abilities was what was truly important. Since Lin Li had passed a test before, the current Garesko's incarnation had advanced by 1 level, and was now restricted to level 26. Just like before, Garesko's incarnation did not say anything, and simply waved his hand, after which everything around them became distorted. By the time it returned to normal, the scenery around them was no longer that of a library. Although it was not the first time that Garesko's incarnation had brought him away to another place, Lin Li still couldn't help but feel a bit shocked. Lin Li was now a powerhouse who was at the peak of the Sanctuary Realms level 26. Lin Li would be able to detect all the changes in this space, not to mention such an obvious transformation. However, everything seemed so natural as if it were a perfect fit. Lin Li even felt that he was already in that space in the first place. Lin Li had originally thought that since he had passed a test and gained more experience and knowledge, the gap between him and Garesko would be reduced a little. However, it seemed to him, now that Garesko was still a superior existence, whom he could only look up to, Garesko's strength was simply boundless. The space that Garesko brought Lin Li to this time was not like an arena like before. Instead, it was a world of void, where there were countless boulders floating around, making Lin Li feel as if he had barged into an asteroid belt in space, and they were constantly shuttling around him. Although the asteroids seemed to be flying slowly, Lin Li could feel that the kinetic energy contained in the asteroids was on par with legendary level magic spells. In such an environment, not only would he have to face Garesko, whose level was higher and who had richer experience and greater skills, he also had to consider the asteroids around him. It seemed that it was not going to be easy for him to pass that test. Just like before, as soon as Lin Li got a clear glimpse of the surroundings, Garesko's incarnation launched a harsh attack on him. The strength of Garesko's incarnation had increased to level 26, and the combat power he could now exert was far greater than before. After exchanging blows for 2 rounds, a giant sun-like fireball penetrated Lin Li's layers of defense, without any hindrance. While whirring at high speed, it stopped in front of him and constantly emitted scorching waves of heat. Looking at the giant fireball that was right in front of him, Lin Li couldn't help but be frightened to the point of breaking out in a cold sweat despite the blazing heat. Lin Li had initially thought that since he had passed a test, mastered the knowledge, and integrated the experience he'd gained, he would at least be able to last a few rounds against Garesko, even if he was far from being comparable to him. However, he had not expected his confidence to be shattered by Garesko's incarnation as soon as he started. The giant fireball gradually dispersed, and Garesko's incarnation once again appeared in front of Lin Li, holding the Helios scepter tightly. Lin Li was just waiting for the right moment to immediately launch an attack on his opponent. However, Garesko's incarnation did not give Lin Li that opportunity, and instead returned to the library together with Lin Li. Lin Li had never enjoyed such a treatment in the inverted tower of the Sky Castle. Instead, he had been abused by Garesko thousands of times, and he had been constantly learning and improving during the process. Hence, although Lin Li had once again been defeated in 2 rounds, he was already ready to be abused thousands of times again. However, Lin Li never expected that he'd be defeated in 1 round. How could he learn anything from the battle, then? However, just as Lin Li was feeling puzzled, a magic book with a simple cover suddenly flew out of nowhere. The magic book flew straight to his side, hovered in front of him, and was then opened by an invisible force. Dozens of pages flipped before stopping. After Lin Li looked at the pages of the books, he immediately understood Garesko's intentions. Clearly, Garesko wanted to make Lin Li find out the reason for his failure in this exchange, and think about the counterattacks that he could make. Actually, the reason for it was very simple, and that was that Lin Li's problem was extremely complex.
Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.